Hello and welcome to Talking Bird Presents Two Dudes Talk About. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, Sean Judy.
Hello there.
Hello. We got doing something a little different this episode. I don't want to use the word potpourri, but that's the appropriate word.
Old dead dried plants making your shit smell nice.
Yes, that's what our topic is. Now we're going to talk about potpourri. No, we're going to do kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
As you say, a chef salad, the chef's special fried rice, where he puts everything that didn't sell in the day before. Basically, this episode is going to be just talking about stuff that probably wouldn't be worth a whole episode, or things that, if I was the kind of person who liked to do podcasts just by myself and tell people about stuff, which I really don't like solo podcasts, unless you're Dan Carlin, is probably the only person I know that can do that. The only podcast I listen to where there's just one guy in a room, and I think he edits. They're about six every. Have you ever listened to Hardcore History?
No, I have not.
So I won't get into it because our show's not his show, but it's like 6 hour kind of him doing his take on a historical event, and they're long. And it's just him, and you'd think it was awful. And if it was me doing it, it would be awful. But anyway, we're going to just talk about a lot of different things. And instead of listing them all now, we'll just cover them as they come up. But first, just an update to probably, I guess, our first two dudes conversation, an addendum, our very popular Glenn Danzig episode, which has still been our most popular episode. Update, this October, we are going to see Glenn Danzig here in Seattle on his 30th anniversary of the first album, Danzig Tour.
I'm totally looking forward to that.
Yes.
It's going to kick some ass.
I'm pretty sure I established on the episode that I have actually never had a chance to see the dark one, the sideburnned one, the cat litter buying one in person. So it's because, it was kind of, anyway, yeah, I'm excited. I was kind of hoping it was going to be the original band, but I also was realistic that, much like the other show that we're going to in a couple weeks, the Smashing Pumpkins.
That's true too.
It's the spirit of the thing, but maybe not all the players.
Well, it's one of those deals where you go, going to see the Pumpkins or going to see Danzig, as long as you've got Billy Corgan and Glenn Danzig, you're okay. Because it's kind of funny. It was like,
I need Jimmy Chamberlain, but that's me.
I think for me, it's mostly the vocals.
Oh yeah.
Like it would just be weird if it was the original Danzig band and then it was somebody else singing, like me or you or.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's one of those deals. Like I remember when Rage Against the Machine broke up, and they got back together as Velvet Revolver.
No, it was Audio Slave.
Audio Slave, right? And it's the other way around.
That's another super group. But
yeah, but I couldn't listen to them because it wasn't. Well, first of all, I mean, clearly Zach is the driving force behind the lyrics and the politics and all the stuff in that band, but. I went and listened to One Day as a Lion, which was him and another guy on a side project because he was singing. And I was like, oh, this feels and sounds like an extension of Rage Against the Machine. All this other stuff was, like you say, weird, super groupy. So as things, I mean, Danzig is we'd kind of talked about before, cycles through a lot of his players, and he does a lot of his own initial writing and recording of parts, in the studio, and then he finds these guys to hang out with on the road. So it's not surprising that we're going to get the whatever modern, most current version of the Danzig backing group is. I'm just, glad to see he's still touring, even though he's kind of talking about.
Yeah, I'm not doing. This is my last thing.
Yeah, but shit. Didn't we get that like 7 times from the Eagles? So it's one of those things.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that it would be kind of fun since you've never seen him before live. That maybe we did a quick a postmortem after we see that show in October. Just
Yeah.
record a quick reaction video.
I think so too. And it really looks like a really good lineup. It's at the for all you people outside the Seattle area, it's at this place called Showbox Sodo, which is kind of a Sodo is south of the Dome or south of downtown now. It used to be, south of the King Dome, which doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, there's been this big thing because there's two show boxes. There's one by the Pikes Market that apparently recently was announced. It was going to be raised and turned into condos, and now it's been a big
cost celeb.
Yeah, with all of a sudden now our city council is in league with, is in agreement with Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses on things.
Which is a portent of end times.
It's you have to be kind of a Seattleite to understand how weird that is. But no, it's a good lineup. It's some group called Mutoid Man, which I've heard good things about. I haven't checked them out yet. What's the other one? Power Trip, which is I've watched some of their stuff. They're definitely a throwback to the kind of like metal that was popular when I was a kid, which I have to admit it tends to be the framework where I'm in right now. Sadly, I'm so steeped in nostalgia or nostalgia adjacent, whatever that may mean, that's a good thing. And then Venom Inc., which is Newcastle on Tyne's own Venom, but not, because Kronos, the crazy dude that you might actually know with the bare chest and the frizzy hair and all this in the amazing part, he's not part of the group, but the two other guys, and it's like
Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
It's
the same band, but not.
I don't even know if they do Venom songs. Yeah, whatever. It's fun. It's probably going to be like 45 minutes, and maybe it'll be great. I mean, that's I don't know what it is about. I went through this big thing when I was younger. The only shows I ever went to were huge shows because that's basically the only way you'd find out about something if it had been advertised, or you have to buy tickets, And then I went through this thing where I only went to like bar shows. Like, I'm not going to big shows anymore. Stand around, pay $18 for a hot dog and $40 for a T-shirt, blah, blah, blah. Well, now I realized I'm really bored sitting around, bars for 3 hours while some guy fixes his guitar and stuff. Now I actually like going to big shows again. And so
it's funny. It has kind of come full circle. Like, you used to go to the Dome shows and the big arena shows and everything. And then, I went through a period as well. And I'm still kind of in the smaller bar show phase because a lot of the bands that I love have either they've lost the appeal of the arena, or they've always been sort of niche-y anyway, and so you're kind of just going to have to follow them in the bars. Like, there's a punk band that I absolutely love called the Anti-Nowhere League, and they're from England, and some people may know, Metallica covered their song So What? Mm-hmm. But I love those guys. I got turned on to them by a dear friend of the family, a guy my brother went to high school with, Jeff Ecker. He was over traveling in Europe in the 80s. He actually went to high school in Switzerland. Long story, but anyway, he was traveling and he stumbled across these guys in a bar and bought a record, and then bought a couple more records and brought them back, and we all just went, "This is amazing shit." Anyway, they come occasionally to the Pacific Northwest, and I've seen them at what is it called this week? El Corazon.
Oh yeah. Oh man, it's like one of my least. I could bitch about every venue in Seattle.
Right.
El Corazon is my second least favorite venue in all of Seattle, and that's where all the great bands come.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if we get around to it, one of the bands that I might be one of the topics we might be talking about, this band Ghost, the Swedish band. I went and saw them at El Corazon, 2 years ago, and they had already outgrown that venue, and
mm-hmm.
It was like they had been playing theaters for their entire tour, and for some reason I don't even how many people you'd say 800 maybe
tops,
maybe
it's not a big
maybe
venue,
even 400, maybe half of that, and it was the worst show, and it's like you're literally pressed up against like just the humanity, the smells.
I know,
like
those earthy aromas.
It was so packed that after the show, I wanted to go buy a T-shirt, and there was no physical way to get to the merch booth because it was like just this wave of people kind of squeezing you out like a toothpaste tube. And it was just like, all of a sudden I got deposited on the street corner. I'm like, oh, I wanted to buy a shirt.
Where's my shorts?
Where's my shirt? But, you know, whatever. It's like, I don't want to do 3 hours on all my least favorite venues in Seattle.
No, it's fine.
Numos is my least favorite.
Really?
Oh, God. Yeah. It's the worst. Have you been to Numos?
I don't think I've been there, no.
So it's not because it's anything other than the fact the way it's set up is the stage is just too low. So if you know, I'm not a very tall guy. I'm about 5'8". And so when I go to shows, it's like I like to hang in the back just because I'm kind of like,
well, you're not a pit baby.
I don't like, I haven't slam danced since I was like 17. So it's like I stay in the back near the fire exit. It's just how
just in case.
It's just how I roll. I've seen too many.
Safety first.
I've seen that Great White video too many times. Yeah. And you cannot see anything. Even if you're all the way in the back. Well, in the back, you get people keep getting pushed towards the wall, which is right by the exit, and the security guards are like, you can't be by the exit. I keep getting pushed. It's like I've got no place to go. It's like either people wait on the stairs, or it's like it has the worst view of any venue that I've ever been to. And I've gone. It's like, I went and saw Tim and Eric live there. Couldn't see anything but from their shoulders up. One of my favorite bands, which called Sloan, they played there once, and it was, I could only see them from shoulder up. I went to a live podcast taping and they all sat in chairs, and I'm like, I can't.
It's just like listening to it, right?
Yeah. And people, and I've never been to a podcast tape. Well, that's not true. I've never been to like a specific, like you went out and got a ticketed event. I've been to like comedy festivals and stuff, but I've never seen people so fucked up than I have at this. It was last podcast on the left. They're like, it's like three guys and they do like serial killers and Fortean type stuff, and it's kind of a comedic based thing, and
because serial killers are hilarious.
Well, trust me, if I could somehow change this to a serial killer podcast and then go back in time 5 years, I could have cracked the code on building a huge listenership. It's just like every podcast now is like either either solving a crime or what's your favorite serial killer or whatever.
Right.
It's kind of that's the realm. Who is your favorite serial killer? No.
Me.
Since we don't have a topic, since we don't have a static topic, let's just talk about serial killer. Ed Kemper was anyway.
All I know is that my good friend Greg McGee, who I grew up with, went through junior high, and we wound up going to different high schools. His mom dated Ted Bundy in junior high. And that's about my only connection to serial killers. So
actually,
there you have it. There's my podcast.
A lady on my paper route who also worked with my wife's father at his office. She was going to go on a date with Ted Bundy, and something happened, and she was like, I don't think I'm going to go out with it. And that was like that kind of, I think there's a lot of ladies. I think Debbie Harry, Blondie, has a story about potentially could have been one of his victims. I don't know. That's again, I'm not going to check because I feel like this is a throwback where I'm not going to constantly check to make sure I'm telling accurate stories. You're going to have to look it up yourself. But
everybody fact checks everybody else anyway. So why should we fact check ourselves?
I think you remember Robert Williams, the artist that did like the Appetite for Destruction cover, like the censored cover.
Right, the censored one.
He did a painting about it, apparently, that she had told.
So it's got to be real.
Yeah.
It's like the internet.
So it's, like the persistence of memory. That really happened.
Yeah, that totally happens. Acid.
So before we get too far off into the weeds on all these things, there is something in the zeitgeist of entertainment that I kind of want to get your take on.
Fire away.
I didn't talk about this ahead of time, so it's you guys are going to get his immediate hot takes.
Ooh, it's a reaction video.
It's hot takes.
Oh, wait.
Yeah. We'll cut these into like 10-minute slices and just release them on YouTube. Hot take. And we'll do like one of those react videos, like everything now is culture is now people just reacting to culture, like a person listening to, a 20-year-old listening to Metallica's Master of Puppets the first time. Have you seen those?
No.
Yeah, it's pretty. Anyway,
That could be a whole topic.
The-
but anyway, continue. So what's the
Well,
hot
I mean,
pressing
I
issue?
want to beat around the bush.
Yeah.
Jean-Luc Picard's return to Star Trek.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? What do we think about this? Considering the current state of Trek and whatever.
I have actually a very, very strong feeling about this. Actually, yeah. On a couple of levels, actually. So let's start with the obvious. Have you seen his most recent TV show?
Is that the one called Blunt Talk or whatever?
Yeah, where he's supposed to be the
No,
TV personality.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Again, Patrick Stewart's a very talented actor. He's very old now.
Yeah, he's like 79 or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't mean like, and again, this is not like, oh, old people are shitty or whatever, but he didn't age for like 35 years, and then he like aged a lot recently.
Oh.
And have you seen his cider commercials?
No.
Okay, so he did a series of commercials, I believe it was for Strongbow Cider.
Okay.
And I think that was about maybe a year ago. And he just comes across as, maybe he was just mailing it in and collecting a check, but it feels like he's being propped up a little bit. Like he's kind of, and so I have a lot of concern about his ability to pull off Picard. Don't get, and I know we talk a lot about Star Wars on in and out on our podcast and whatever, but I'm a huge Star Trek fan too, and I love all the old Star Trek stuff. Man, there's some things about Voyager I didn't like, and Enterprise was weird, and I came back to it later and actually enjoyed it. Didn't really like the end of Deep Space Nine. Turned in kind of a soap opera in a bad way, like demonic possession, Young and the Restless kind of soap opera. And the movies kind of trailed off and got weird too. The Next Generation movies, and then there was also that bad patch of Kirk there in the middle. But for the most part, huge Star Trek fan and steeped in the lore and loved all the, most of all the shows and movies and whatnot. And Picard is one of my favorite characters. Picard, Worf, like those guys are awesome. And I initially, when they said, they're going to bring him back, they were saying that it was going to be a new show on the CBS
all access
thing. Yeah, their streaming service. I was like, well, this must mean that Discovery is failing to attract people to their subscription service. So they're trying to capitalize on one of the more popular, characters and TV shows in the history of Star Trek, which was Next Generation. And kind of, hey fans, come on back. We're doing, we're getting the gang back together and whatnot. And I mean, it could be, again, as we've flogged this dead horse so many times. If the story is good, it could be amazing, right? You could have old Admiral Picard, getting ready to retire or whatever, and then the Borg show up again or something. I don't know, like, what's, it reminds me of the closing, the finale that they did, All Good Things for the end of the series, where you've got Geordi's off teaching at MIT or whatever, and Data is the literature professor at Oxford, and and everybody's retired, and Riker's an admiral, and Picard is like senile and working his vines and at the vineyard and all that stuff. Like, there's a lot. I mean, but that was a really fantastic story because he got dragged back in by Q, and then they had this big reverse time. Anyway, it was a good story. Go watch it. Point is, you can bring in old Picard and you can make an excellent story, and you have this rich tapestry of characters that you can reach back, and Jonathan Frakes and LeVar Burton and all those guys are all still around, so you can totally bring them back. They can all, John Delancey, all those people are around, so it's like, come on in and let's have a show. But then I started reading more about this, and more things have been leaked out, and the deal is that it's not going to be in any way connected to the original show.
Right.
It's going to be in the new Kelvin timeline, which is what they're referring to. The J.J. Abrams films, the Discovery TV show, all take place on what is known as the Kelvin timeline, which is there is no Vulcan and the time travel and all that kind of junk. So
Thanks, Eric Bana.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I don't even remember his character's name in that movie.
And so it's like, I was like, my interest was piqued. I wasn't like the fanboy who ran out. I was like, yeah, Picard's back. But I was like, hey, this could be interesting. Well, let's see what's going on over there. And I started reading about it, and I found out it's just going to be another version of Discovery. It's just going to be Discovery: The Next Generation. And I said, fuck you, Rian Johnson. This sucks. Because I hate Discovery. I think it's stupid. I think it completely shits on everything that's come before in Star Trek. I am angry at it. I do not like the show. And if they're just going to bring in Patrick Steward to try and prop that shit up and try and capitalize on all the old fanboys like me who are like, oh, yeah. No, not going to happen. So I'm still not buying CBS streaming.
Yeah. That's the thing. And again.
And that's your hot take.
I've heard a lot of, reviews of Discovery, and I've not heard a lot of positivity coming from that. I've only seen essentially the pilot, and now that they're coming out on DVD or whatever pretty soon, I assume that they'll be hitting streaming or I don't know. Maybe they're just going to keep it behind that paywall as long as possible. But if it's like anything else, when a streaming company releases their product on disc, the value of it drops really quick. So it's like you can get like Stranger Things or something on DVD or Blu-ray for like, I don't know, $10-$12 or something like that.
Well, yeah, because I can go watch it anytime
right
on Netflix.
So maybe when it gets down to $10 or $12, I'll give it a try. And it's like, I mean, again, I've seen the videos and who's that guy? Dictor Van Doomcock or whatever.
Doomcock.
That guy,
he's so awesome.
He's like this guy who basically he does like, it's almost like his version of Space Ghost, but I will say that he's funny in small doses when he has to do like a live stream and he has to try to maintain his evil
voice.
Yeah, he loses it midway through, and it's like, yeah, you might have watched.
The short videos are awesome.
Yes.
And a side note, I would love if somebody out there like Reaction did a Doomcock 3 3/4 figure. That would be fantastic. I would collect the hell out of that.
The dude has like a little mask and stuff.
He looks like a reject from the old Flash Gordon movie. The 80s Flash Gordon.
Right.
Movie. Yeah. He looks.
Yeah, it's like, and if you've ever thought like this show, like that, well, these guys are haters or whatever, you might want to check him out.
He hates everything.
This guy is kind of, he's angry, and he just wants to make sure everybody knows that Star Trek sucks. I mean, it's, and I had heard this thing before that essentially that whatever organization or the Kurtzman version of Star Trek, this Alex Kurtzman, who's now the shepherd, that somehow Paramount or CBS, or I don't know how it's divvied up, but technically CBS doesn't even have the rights to these versions of the characters, or so they have to do everything within the quote Kelvin timeline, which again, everything is divergent from George Kirk. Is George Captain Kirk's dad? Not George, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, George Kirk dying on that ship, and apparently everything is divergent from this one guy dying.
Well, it's even worse than that. It's the timeline is the timeline issue with the new Kelvin stuff has to deal with. It's all Spock's fault.
Oh,
because there was something that happened, and this guy comes along and destroys Vulcan, and then Spock is trying to go back in time to stop him from doing it, and ultimately that's the catalyst that winds up destroying Vulcan. Anyway, so that's why we have new Spock calling old Spock in the first movie and like figuring all this stuff out and whatever. Anyway,
now isn't Spock coming back to Discovery? There's some talk that they're bringing Spock in. Is it not going to be played by the guy that, what's his name? Zachary Quinto?
It better be played by Zach Quinto because he's the Spock in the... Or are they going to bring back Sarek, or what are they going to do?
Because... Well, they have Sarek as... Well, I mean, they've already been crossed.
Did they already have Sarek in there?
Ben Cross plays Sarek in the movies, and then a different person plays Sarek in Discovery.
Right. Oh, that's right. Because supposedly the main character was raised by him. It's just anyway. It's so silly.
It's so It just seems so convoluted. Now, I'm going to give myself a chance. Maybe I'll watch it, and maybe it'll make sense to me. I mean, I didn't enjoy the first 2 episodes, but I like that. I like Sonequa Martin Green. I liked her on The Walking Dead. I was excited about her being it, but this kind of almost concept of, and I have, like I said, only 2 episodes, but I've seen some recaps. This almost kind of like this Forrest Gumping of the timeline of like, I've been a party to the most important things. And they've done that before. I mean, they tried to gin up some excitement after that first season of Enterprise was kind of soft. Maybe that was first season. When did they?
No, the first season was kind of.
Did they have Borg in the first or second season? The second season is the Xindi.
I don't know. It might have been the third season, because here's the deal with the Enterprise show started out with, supposedly taking place not too far after Zefram Cochrane and the first, trans warp flight or whatever, or first warp flight of humans. And so then the Vulcans show up and they're kind of like being dicks about everything, about they want to mitigate or they want to manage humanity's, travels in space. And the humans, of course, are all plucky and, and angry about it. And so you've got just some terrible acting. But anyway, that show winds up trying to do, like you say, Forrest Gump or Guildenstern or Rosencrantz its way through Star Trek. They first meeting with the Klingons, first, this and that, and trying to give you the backstory on why we got to where we got with the original show with Kirk. These are troublesome and problematic kind of trends in this whole Star Trek universe, is that everything for a minute there with the Next Generation and with Voyager and Deep Space Nine, it was like we were moving the universe forward. We were, we'd gone however many 100 years in the future after Kirk, or 100 years in the future after Kirk, or whatever. New Federation, the Klingons are our allies now. How about that? And like all this stuff. Everybody wants to go back in time now, and everybody wants to do a prequel. Well, we have a very convoluted and very cluttered history now with Star Trek, because we've had the Kirk shows and then the Kirk movies, and then we've had the Picard shows and all those spin-offs in the Picard movies. But then we had Enterprise, which took place before the Kirk show, and that's all canon, right, if for lack of a better word. And now we're trying to do something different. So we've created this new timeline or whatever, where things are in an alternate universe, and Zach Quinto Spock and whatever, and it's like Heroes / something else. But we're trying to go back in time in this universe, but this universe is supposed to have been the same up to a certain point. So we already have all the stuff that exists in the past that we're not necessarily saying is wrong or different. We're saying, there's this divergent point, and so we have a little bit of different look for the ships and the uniforms and stuff, but we still all have the same players. We've got, the Klingon Empire and the Romulans, all these people, whatever. But now, with the Discovery show, we've gone back and we're rewriting even more and recreating even more. And so I don't really understand how they're justifying that.
Yeah, it's an odd choice, because, the only thing I can think of is, look at what they did. Gosh, is it 10 years more now is when they decided to bring Doctor Who back.
Right.
I'm not a big fan. I kind of enjoyed up to about the midway through the Tennant, and then I kind of like the seriousness of the originals, even though it's like, tempera paint on cardboard and, last week's salad draped on somebody as an alien. I liked how they all took it seriously. Whereas there is a certain kind of, I call it like the Whedoning of things, because Joss Whedon has created
true.
You know, as much as I enjoyed Buffy and Angel and all that stuff. I'm not, as much as he annoys the hell out of me now, I'm not going to sit there and say like I didn't enjoy what he was putting out. I even enjoyed Firefly up until people kept trying to make it something it wasn't. But that kind of jokey kind of wink nod to the audience, like, oh, we're all just which has now infected everything from, you know,
right. It's the winking at the audience.
It's in Star Wars, it's in Star Trek, and that kind of thing. And that being said, when Doctor Who went in that direction, in some ways it softened the blow by it being a linear reboot. And the fact that, yes, we're not wiping away any of your stuff. It's like he's doing, you know, we're doing different things. You know, now there's a lady, the Doctor's a lady, and all that stuff. But nothing about that is affecting the past. You know, it's like you can compartmentalize, you can enjoy it all in a linear fashion. But yeah, as time goes on and they keep rebooting, but not rebooting, and then they kind of, it becomes,
well, it's almost like Bond in a way. Like we've had Bond for 50 years.
Right.
And technically he hasn't been rebooted. I mean, he has been rebooted, but he hasn't been like,
right.
And I mean, even when you get up to the new guy, Daniel Craig, when you get up to Daniel Craig, it's like, that's actually the hard reboot at that point. But you figure you had like 5 dudes play him or whatever, and you have all these movies, and it covers all this time. And you're like, he should be dead by now, right? Like he was a spy in the 60s, and now he's a spy in the 2000s, and it's like, dude, you know, like, but it's that the year. It's kind of like we had talked about. There's sort of that weird. Is there a timeline in Star Wars kind of thing? Like, was there a timeline in Bond? Like, is a Bond year, or is our year a Bond year, or is a Bond year like 20 of our years? Like, you know, kind of a thing. And then, like, we just totally can, you know, put it in our back pocket and be like, yeah, there's a new guy playing him now, and it doesn't bother me. Like, you would think that after about the 3rd or 4th actor, people would be like, can we just leave this? You know, kind of. But it's the same thing with Doctor Who. Doctor Who's kind of rebooted a couple of times. I mean, it has. I mean, obviously the Gallifreyan Time Lord thing with the regeneration clearly is a pre-written reboot structure where you're like, hey, we can have an actor come on and do this for 4 or 5 seasons, and then when he gets too much of an ego, we can fire him. We can hire another guy, and he can be the next Doctor. You know, like, and it's a great,
yeah,
you know, thing to have in your as a production company or as a writer or director, have that in your back pocket where you're like, oh yeah, my characters can totally shapeshift after they die or whatever, and they get 9 lives like a cat, and so I can make these shows for like 50 years and nobody will care.
The term is regenerate.
Yeah,
I know, and it's
jelly baby.
Well, it kind of brings up an interesting point back to the Picard situation. I'm not suggesting this. I'm just saying I'm actually surprised that they're not pitching a young, like the USS Stargazer, which was Picard's first. Was that his first command? Or
it was his first command, yeah.
Okay. So he, you know, it loomed large in the mythology of when he would get wistful or something, and he would tell I was on the Stargazer, and I had to plot using, you know, a sextant.
I know, back in my day.
And it's like, it kind of begs the question. It's like, if maybe Star Trek, instead of Star Trek Discovery being, you know, another prequel series, maybe they should have kind of greased the wheels with you could have gotten a young kind of, you know, a young Picard cipher. You could have brought Patrick Stewart back to do the book, because the book ending thing, that's one thing I'm really shocked that has not been done yet. Although the rumors are that's what we're getting for Indiana Jones 5.
I would hope so.
We're getting a book ending with a young Indiana Jones, that they're probably going to have to throw the TV show out in the toilet, but they're going to bring a young like a 20-something, kind of an Alden Ehrenreich. Of course, that some of that stuff kind of has fallen within those weird Kathleen Kennedy rumors I've heard that are poorly sourced, but whatever. But my point is it's like they could have avoided a lot of this issues that they're having with Discovery by kind of, you know, best foot forward, bring Patrick Stewart back, you know, do a prequel series, because obviously they feel that there's not enough meat on the bone post Voyager, which I guess would be the last on the timeline, or Nemesis or whatever. It could have solved two problems. Of course, it's very dependent on getting Patrick Stewart to sign off on it, and maybe in the development they were like, Patrick Stewart just recently decided he wanted to come back and do this because, you know, he was making those X-Men movies and doing quite well at it.
Well, and he had said something about how, I thought I was done with Picard, but then they came and they sort of pitched him on something, and for whatever reason it resonated with him, so he signed on for it. And maybe we'll find out more. Yeah, I mean, as we get closer to what that pitch was and what the story's going to be.
The cynical part of me is that they want, in some ways, you know, an actor wants to act, and I'll never fault an actor for wanting to return to a role, because that's their job, is to make money. Being, you know, they want to caretake the role that they created. But I also wonder if it's like, oh, well, they're going to do it, and then they're going to try to find a way to kind of shoehorn in the sensibilities of the new show, and kind of, oh, well, you know, it's very I don't even know, like, the big complaints of Discovery, because I haven't watched a lot of it, but a lot of people just say it just doesn't jive well with the previous things established. And my point is that they would bring in, you know, the daddy of daddies to kind of like go, no, this is all good. I approve. And so it's like he puts his stamp on it. And there's only one other person, you know, living that has, you know, a bigger cast, and I honestly think, you know, Bill Shatner's probably way too old, and, you know, he's a little too feisty these days. If you follow his Twitter, they probably don't want to bring him in and, you know, have to, you know,
deal with him.
Yeah, deal with him, or deal with, you know, the backlash people because of his current, you know, his Twitter wars that he gets into with. God, who does he fight with? I don't
even follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, he loves to get into fights with fans of what's the Scottish show? Outlander.
Oh no.
Because there was this controversy within the fandom. If we want to talk, you know, toxic fandoms, apparently Outlander has like this fan thing that really wants the protagonist, the male protagonist and the female protagonist, to date in real life.
Oh, Jesus.
And to the point where they constantly talk about it. Like, I don't know if this is current day controversy or I'm talking about something that happened 2 years ago. And Bill Shatner he'll get, you know, he fights with them and stuff. I don't follow it that closely. I mean, I just dip my toe in for a little bit of late night entertainment of like, what the hell is he talking about? And
is he back on the Get a Life thing?
Oh man, he definitely is on that. It's just that kind of, you know, and we've talked many times about, like, you know, and probably participated in a little bit of fan entitlement, but you know, it's, you know,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
I read about that in a book once.
It's like, but all I'm saying is Adam Driver should divorce his wife and marry Daisy Ridley,
right?
Unless they're half brothers or whatever.
Well, then they should totally date, because that's how Mark Hamill did it.
Because that's Hollywood. That's how Hollywood wants it.
That's right, and how Hollywood wants, Hollywood gets.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't even really talked about. It's funny because it used to be when something would come out, you would go, yes, so-and-so is coming back to the role in, you know, Star Trek, Don't Steal My Picnic Basket, or whatever they're going to call it. But now it's, you know, now that as much as studios complain, or TV studios complain about, like, how fan expectation and fan demand become this you know, thing that they can never predict. It's just like this weird thing, like, we're going to put something out here. If they might love it, and we're going to win the internet this week, or they're going to hate it. We're going to be we're going to have to lock down all of our Twitter profiles and our LinkedIns, and we're going to have to, you know, hide in our house for a week, which is kind of scary, but it's not too far from the truth the way these things feel. But now they just provide this kind of, like, you get the thumbnails of things now. You basically get the business deal. They go in, you know, Patrick Stewart signs off, like, I'm going to do my role again. I've killed off Professor X.
That's right, yeah.
And you know, I'm 81 years old and ...
Got bills to pay.
And I'm really tired of hanging out with what's his name? Ian McKellen all the time. It's like,
well, it's
like, why do I have to drag this guy? Why do we have to do everything together now?
Because they've been doing everything together for like 70 years.
Yeah, exactly.
And they were all part of the Royal Shakespearean Company when they were in their 20s.
True.
So, I mean, they're besties, but it's kind of funny. But, Patrick Stewart like went off and he married some like 40-year-old chick, and he's got, this massive, estate somewhere in California and whatever. And it's like, okay,
and
I get it.
He discovered the reefer in his mid-70s.
Yeah. She's a big-time jazz musician. So apparently he did discover
jazz cigarettes.
Yeah, he basically has his turtleneck and his doobies, and But anyway, he's got bills, is what I'm saying. So, like you say, I don't begrudge anyone. If somebody came to me and said, "Hey, here's a 3-picture deal, and you're going to make $500,000 this time, and then $1 million if we make the second one, or whatever," and like, sure, what am I playing? Like, I don't even care. Like, do I got to dress up like Little Bo Peep? Because I'll do it. Like, because I need the money.
Yeah.
So I understand that, but at the same time, I think that what's disingenuous about the whole situation is not Patrick Stewart. I think it's more Paramount CBS, and this is something we're seeing in a lot of fandoms right now, where the companies that own the properties have gone on a path, pushing an agenda, whatever it may be, and it's rubbed people the wrong way in their fan bases, and so they doubled down on it and kept pushing, and then they've lost a bunch of money, and then they go, oh shit, and then we announced that Patrick Stewart's coming back, and it's the same thing with Star Wars. Oh, hey, Billy Dee is going to be in the next one.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to bring back all these cool characters you loved in the EU, and we're going to pack everybody in this movie.
And guys, guess what we have? We've got old, unused footage of Carrie Fisher.
Yeah.
Isn't that going to be really exciting to see something wasn't even filmed for the thing you're seeing, and we're going to have to like shape it and like whittle it down to something that appears to be a narrative? And you're supposed to get excited because no, you didn't put all your heart and your feelings, your weird feelings. That's this weird thing where you all of a sudden have emotions about famous people you don't know, but it happens. About this person last Christmas. I kind of feel like I got all that. I mean, we already said we weren't going to talk about Star Wars, but I will say this. I got all my emotions out about that kind of last Christmas. And partly, and that's external to my feelings about the film. This fact that, like, you said goodbye, and I thought, artistically they broke, for our princess, the dedication of the film, which, a lot of people on that production have, in the last 40 years, have passed on,
And she's the only one who's ever been honored that way.
And again, I'm not saying she shouldn't be honored, but it's like this thing. But there was a very obvious tribute to her, and everybody kind of got it out. And then our feelings about the movie, I feel, are external to all that. And then it's like they're coming back and going like,
well, you're reopening a wound.
Yeah, you're kind of like now you're going to do this thing, and I'm supposed to feel good about it. And it's like, they've gone to this whole thing about like, well, Todd Fisher is cool with it, and I'm like, yeah, I'm sure he is, and and then her daughter is cool with it.
Well, she's got it. She's got bills.
Yeah, and it's like that's fine.
Coke's expensive.
Whatever. Yes, but it's delicious and
delicious.
On ice.
On ice.
But
right up my nose. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to distract you. But
I'm very, very torn about that. And again, and I guess the one thing I should say I was going to say before I started going off on this tangent is, if I've learned anything in late 2018, even though I've said it, I'm starting to try to learn this, is that just because they ruin your childhood, well, they don't ruin my childhood, they ruin your favorite characters from childhood, doesn't mean they take away the things that came before. So you can, if new Picard sucks,
right, you still have old Picard.
You still have old Picard.
Right.
We could go off on a tangent, which I won't, about why I feel Star Wars is different from that kind of thing. But
yeah, I mean, we don't need to get into the differences between. I mean, there's some really good books written about that, but we don't necessarily need to go back down the Star Wars path. If you want to know my feelings about the Carrie Fisher and what happened in the last movie, go re-listen to the Last Jedi review episode, because I said some pretty harsh and strong things that I still stand by. But yeah, it's difficult in the age that we live in the media age, where everything is instant and we have constant access to the thoughts, like the streaming consciousness of the people involved in these processes. It's almost like everything is thrown out there. It's almost now, it feels like everything's thrown out there to gauge a reaction. And then whatever gets the most best reaction is what they go with. And I feel like the Picard thing is emblematic of that in a way, because they have no idea. They have no real show. They've got nothing written. All they did was they just said, hey, man, we're struggling. We're losing money on Discovery. Nobody's buying the streaming service. We need your help. You got to come bail us out. And we can't trust Shatner because he's crazy, right?
And he does. Well, and he's not ship ready. And his character's dead.
Well, yeah, a couple times.
Yeah.
And I think it would be hilarious. Like, I would love it if they brought him on as a side character, like put him in makeup and make him an alien, and make him like the cantankerous shithead who like gives everybody crap. Like, make him the bartender at the on the star base or something. Like, just put him in a role where he can be himself in a way, and be involved in the franchise. I think it'd be hilarious. Like, I think it'd be great, but you can't bring him back as Kirk.
Right.
He's just, I'm sorry. He's not, like you say, he's not ship ready. I'll just leave it at that. But I think that the Picard thing is just them grasping at straws to try and placate a customer base that they don't have any real understanding of. And again, this is something else to, bring it up to a sort of a meta level, is that this is happening in a lot of fandoms right now. It's happening in comic books, it's happening in TV shows, it's happening in movies, it's happening in sci-fi, fantasy, gaming, like all kinds of different communities. Is that you have a small group of people who work at these companies who, not unlike Hollywood or not unlike a lot of places, it's an enclave and it's an echo chamber. And so you get a bunch of people in a room who are like, this is going to be great. And they all look at each other and like, what do you think? Oh, I think it's going to be great. And it just goes around in a circle. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. We're going to do this thing. It's going to be so dope. And then they run it out. And then they realize, well, they don't, but it flops. And then they start making excuses for it. This is where the fandom, and I hate the word, but this is where the fandom becomes quote unquote toxic, right? Is because you have a bunch of people who have been supporting something. I mean, you pick it, It could be a sports team,
Yeah,
whatever.
Super analogous to sports right now.
And they've been supporting it forever. And then ownership does something. You trade your favorite player, or they kill your favorite character in the TV show, or they change the entire origin or background story of your favorite comic book character, or you name it. And then the fans who've been buying and supporting this thing with their hearts and souls and their dollars forever, they balk at that and they say, hey, why did you do that? Everything was great. And I understand change, right? And I'm not saying I'm an anti-change and I'm some weird, Luddite who wants to kill the internet and turn off TVs and all this stuff and go back to like agrarian living or whatever. But some change for the sake of change is not always good change. So we're seeing a lot of that going on in these fandoms, and then the fans say, well, screw that. Like, this isn't what I signed up for. And instead of course correcting appropriately, there's a lot of doubling down on those choices, which then drives even more people away. And then you get the fighting in the fandom, and then everybody throws their hands up in the air and they walk away from it. Only then, after they've lost a lot of money or viewership or readership or attendance or whatever, do they go, oh, we get it. We're going to do that thing that you wanted. But now
it feels dirty.
It does feel dirty. And that's the thing. And so a lot of people, they see that and they go, well, clearly you're just trying to dangle this in front of me to get me to come back. And then the other thing is that because we got mad the first time, or we voiced our displeasure the first time with whatever it is you did, and you ignored us and you kept doing it until we finally had to, bankrupt you by not buying your product or going to your thing or whatever. Now all of a sudden you're claiming that you understand, and this is your peace offering, but we don't trust it. It's like, it's like nobody wanted Billy D. Williams at Lucasfilm Limited. Nobody wanted Billy D. Williams back involved in Star Wars for the last 2 movies, and they didn't even bring his ass back for a flashback bookend moment like in the Solo movie.
Right.
And then the fans are like, F you, and they've lost $200 million on the whole thing, and they're like, hey, everybody, we got Billy D for episode 9.
And he's 4 years older than he was the first time you wanted him.
Right.
Which, again, I'm not trying to pick on old people, but we're...
Well, no, but you, I mean, it's the cycle of life, right?
Right.
We have a window of opportunity, and it's like the same thing I was saying about Patrick Stewart. Brilliant actor, amazing actor, great stuff. The body of his work, is fantastic. But he's getting older, and he's getting to a point where he's not as sharp as he used to be as an actor. I don't know if that is reflective of his personal life in any way, and I'm not, making any kind of weird claims about that. But it feels like he's not at the height of his skills. And it's like Felix Hernandez, right? Like, we should have traded him 3 years ago. But now he's just kind of mediocre and crappy. Sorry, he's a pitcher in the Mariners.
You pick on poor Felix, man. I know, but
he's no longer King Felix. He's more like Prince or Duke Felix.
But we love him.
Oh yeah, we do. We love him. But it's the same thing though. It's like you can watch the decline.
Yeah.
And you're watching the decline, and we're all kind of trying to put our arms around him and be like, oh, remember when Felix threw the perfect game 5 years ago? And you're like, oh yeah, he was good once. And yeah. And so we're kind of doing that now with all these actors. Billy D. Like, man, it would have been great to have him 5 years ago. But now, what's he going to be like? I'm sure he's going to be fine, and I'm sure they're not going to ask him to like do his own stunts and that other kind of stuff. But it, like you say, it feels dirty. It feels like the brands are trying to lure us back in with just. It's a whole lot of sugar and not a lot of nutrition, So anyway, it's just kind of my take on all that.
Yeah, it's again, maybe something great will thing. I mean, Logan. Did you see Logan?
I have not.
Okay, well, you might. He's really good at Patrick Stewart's really good in that.
Okay, that movie's like what, 4 years old, 3 years old?
No, 2.
Oh, okay.
2 maybe. It's definitely worth checking out. It is a kind of situation where he is physically restrained throughout the whole movie, so it's like he isn't doing action. It's this idea that somehow you're going to get, I was trying to think about like when he did the last time that he really was physical in a Star Trek movie. Which,
probably would have been the last one, Insurrection, right? Or not Insurrection, Nemesis.
Nemesis. I'm for some reason I think of Insurrection more only because I think I've seen
he is
it.
more physically active.
It's like, and there's the whole aspect of the youth thing. We call that around the house. We call that Star Trek Planet of the Hippies. Nice. It's just Star Trek Planet of the Hippies. It's like which Star Trek movie you want to watch? Planet of the Hippies. My wife always wants to watch Planet of the Hippies. It's the movie you're like, really? You guys?
Worf gets a zit.
You guys are really talking about how firm your boobs are and zits, and it literally was like they took the script for a 4th season Next Gen episode and
made it 2 hours.
Made it super. I don't know. I was gonna start talking about the Jon Favreau thing. Let's not.
The Jon Favreau. Star Wars?
Yeah, Star Wars. The fact
we can touch on that.
Apparently is going to cost $10 million an episode. That's crazy.
That's half of a Harrison Ford appearance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good, and the rumors are it's like this Mandalorian thing, and it's going to be post Return of the Jedi, and so it's probably going to be actually thematically more tied into, say, Clone Wars and Rebels than the movies, which I guess will be a good way for them to sidestep having to CGI people, and I don't know. I mean, I think we're going to be. I think that's the thing. I think the big thing that we're going to be seeing going forward of these movies are a lot of our old favorites, digitally de-aged. People have made a lot of speculation about Mark Hamill showing up in Ireland and maybe not having much of a beard. Like, what's going on with Mark and his beard?
He's going to be a Force ghost.
They're gonna de-age him to look like either like, the Billy Mays version of Luke. I stole that from Red Letter Media. But,
nice.
Or immediately post second Death Star, they can just de-age him. I mean,
yeah,
it's
this is rapidly turning into a Star Wars thing. And that's fine, and I don't have a problem with that. But this goes to what we were talking about with the fandom and the people who love and know Star Wars. We got initially, the Force Ghost was what you look like when you died. Okay? So Yoda, we didn't get young, sexy puppet Yoda from Episode 1, who looked terrible. We got, crusty old rubber Yoda from Empire Strikes Back, right? Or early Returns, whatever. Whenever he died, Empire Strikes Back. I forget now. Anyway, I
you
drink
forget when Yoda died?
Yeah, 900 years old you reach, right? But the point of that is, like, then we got when Vader died and we got his Force Ghost, he was old man Vader. Now, obviously, Lucas made the decision to put in Hayden Christensen in the special editions, and he made the case for that, saying that was the last time he was a good Jedi, right? And so the standing canon now, if you go with expanded and special editions, which is what Lucasfilm claims is the real deal, the Force Ghost thing is something that we were taught by Qui-Gon in Death, and we learned that you appear as the Force Ghost in your most recent good Jedi visage, right? Whatever that may be. It may have been when you died, may have been 35 years ago before you became a Sith Lord, okay? If that's the case, we don't need to de-age Luke. We need old crusty Luke, because old crusty Luke died as a good guy, and he was never a bad guy.
Yeah, that's just my theory that he's going to come back young, because I just thought...
Well, I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
Or his... And again, this is also problematic, because if Rian Johnson's version of the Force, which I do not want to accept...
I was going to say, I wish I had like one of those soundboards, and I would just hit the sound of a toilet flushing when you said that.
Exactly. His version of the Force is that when Luke goes into the Matrix and projects himself, his residual self-image is young Luke with the brown beard and the Billy Mays look, like you said. Though the internet speculation on that is, well, that's the last way that Kylo remembers him, so that's the way he's going to appear to Kylo or whatever. It's all a bunch of crap. But the point is, we've muddied the waters about all of that. And so, yes, Mark Hamill is back, and he is filming, and he is involved for on whatever level and whatever scale. And he doesn't have his beard, and everybody's out freaking out and speculating about that. I have no idea what it means. Like, we were having a conversation in one of our sweaty groups offline here about whether or not we're going to, who's excited for episode 9 and all that stuff. And I made an off-color joke about why I'm interested. But suffice it to say, I want to see this thing because it's like a car wreck. I've been waiting in traffic for 3 hours to get past this car wreck, and I'll be goddamned if I don't slow down and look, because it's taken this much time out of my day. Well, it's the same thing. I've given most of my adult and childhood life to following Star Wars, the brand, and waiting for these movies to come out. I'll be goddamned if I'm going to skip one. But at the same time, I don't have any expectations for this one, which is probably why it will be the least shitty of the new things, because my expectations are so low. No pun intended. But they're so just, basement level expectations for this movie that I might walk out there going, hey, that wasn't half bad. Even though it may suck. Right. I'll be like, oh, right. That was all right, I guess.
Yeah. I know. It's kind of the feeling, it's some of the excuses that we've made for the Han Solo movie, that some of the stuff that works and doesn't work and whatever. It's like, this is not The Last Jedi. That's true, I guess. Well, if you continue to lower the bar, if you continue to lower expectations, then success is guaranteed. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I I feel a little checked out right now with it. It's kind of like people start speculating about like the plot, and I go, "Really? You care?" I mean,
well, yeah, and it's a year and a half out still. Like,
and I, you know, I've
maybe
heard
this time next year I'll start talking about speculation because we'll have a little more facts.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a couple of these leaked. You know, that's the big thing now is people use their skills to come up with these elaborate scenarios or treatments that they go, oh, somebody left this in the copier at Lucasfilm. I just so happened to go to 4chan to tell you about.
Right.
And it's like
First rule of Fight Club.
I kind of love that stuff because it never turns out. It almost, I would honestly say maybe the Last Jedi is probably the movie that was the leaks were actually the most accurate that I'd heard, kind of like the little things here and there that but I kind of stopped going for spoilers after a while because the spoilers were there were so many of them, and I thought, oh, eventually these are going to be right. It's going to ruin it for me and blah, blah, blah. I mean, but you know, whatever. As much as I like go, oh, I'm done. And then somebody will say something and I'll go, oh,
well, that's interesting.
Well, that's like it's like the toy thing. It's like I'm done with these toys, and then something comes out, and then you're just like, "Oh, that Gamorrean guard!
I know, right?
He's so beautiful. He's
gorgeous.
So beautiful." I only collect classic Black Series and Rogue One. Oh,
and Solo.
Oh wait,
and,
is that? Do you have that Shadow the Empire thing? Because I'll make a trade for that if you need. It's like it's that kind of problem.
I know.
But anyway,
it's a total self-loathing.
let's just kind of move on to something else.
Sure.
Something I wanted to kind of just talk a little bit about was somebody has passed on to the next realm recently, and well, actually, it was May, I think it was. I just wanted to, because I kept on thinking of like I want to do like a solo cast where I talk about it, but I couldn't really get it together. So maybe I'll just talk a little bit about Art Bell. Who, if people don't know, Art Bell was a guy, he, like I said, he passed away back in May at, I think he was like 69. But he was kind of a creature of the pre-internet 90s. He was a radio host who had been, working in radio his entire life, but somewhere around the late 80s, early 90s, he kind of hit on something that was very, very, very popular, which was he talked about, Fortean things. So all the crazy stuff that now unfortunately seems to be, discussed all the time. It was kind of like, anyway, my point is like ghosts, UFOs, weird phenomenon, if you don't know what Fortean stuff is. And it was kind of like when he died, it was kind of, not really the end of an era because his era, unfortunately, had kind of passed and, well, good or bad or indifferent, it's morphed into something very different now with podcasting and thing where it's like you can't throw a stick and you don't hit a successful podcast that deals with strange phenomena. Basically, podcast version of my favorite TV show as a child, which was In Search Of, hosted by Leonard Nimoy. You should look it up on YouTube if you've never experienced it. There's some,
and not the crappy new version.
Not the, yeah. And I ducked in and on the History Channel, Zachary Quinto has taken over again for Leonard Nimoy. Actually, that's not true. He's taking over for Mitch Pileggi.
That's true. So the X-Files stepped in for a second. But anyway, continue with Art.
Yeah. So Art was kind of an interesting guy. He lived in the town of Pahrump, Nevada. He basically lived on a compound out in the desert, a high desert, as he would say, in the great American Southwest. It was like one of those things where it's like, yeah, on first blush, you'd be like, yeah, this is ridiculous. But, it would run from 10 to 2 on AM radio and
10 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Yeah, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then it would loop back around for a couple hours. And then he'd have a show on the weekend. So he literally was on 7 days a week for at least 4 to 6 hours. You could constantly dip in. So pre-internet and being able to just dump everything onto your phone, you had to kind of make an effort. But once you kind of got hooked on the guy, because he really knew how to bring the listener into it. He kind of occasionally would be skeptical, but generally he was kind of along for the ride. I wouldn't necessarily call him an enabler, but he definitely had people. He was perfectly comfortable about getting people whipped up about things that were, kind of the things that concerned people 20, 25 years ago, say like the coming Y2K.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, comets coming through the atmosphere. I mean, basically,
doomsday scenarios.
Yeah,
stuff.
Doomsday stuff, ghost,
Aliens,
paranormal,
ghost,
SETI, this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, SETI, yeah.
And so he kind of gave a voice to a lot of like interesting personalities, and for lack of a better term, a lot of them cranks, obviously.
Right.
But it was very addictive at the time, and he definitely is like one of those things where people say, "Oh, he had a voice made for radio." It really did. He was a smoker, so he had this kind of deep, sonorous rasp. He was very he had a very good. He got into this stuff later on his career, so at that point he'd already done like the rock radio stuff. So he'd already had a long, storied career in doing radio, so he had this confidence with it, and he knew what he wanted in a show, and he produced the show himself. I think it was something to do. He would send his feed back to LA, and then they would send it out to affiliates or something like that. He actually owned a radio station that was his transmitter or whatever. But the actual Coast to Coast show, which was his show, I want to say he only did it for maybe 12 years or something like that. But anyway, he would have he would talk about the normal kind of stuff that you would be like, oh, Ghost of this and the Amityville. But then he also had his own cast of characters, and like basically the Whack Pack for Art Bell, he'd have Richard Hoagland, who I don't know if he actually ever really worked for NASA or not, so I'm not. He's the kind of guy who would probably he Googles himself a lot, so I don't want to get sued. But he would come on and talk about crystal castles on the moon, and then he would have Linda Moulton Howe, which you would know. Linda Moulton Howe shows up a lot on Giorgio Tsoukalos's Ancient Aliens. Right. Actually, a lot of if you watch if you enjoy watching Ancient Aliens, it's a lot of that kind of stuff. But he also, as time went on, he became kind of a pop culture guy. He did some appearances. He appeared on Millennium, the Lance Henriksen show, or was it
the X-Files spinoff?
Actually, no. I think he technically was on the X-Files, but they did an episode that tied up the Millennium timeline.
Right. Well, because that was a spinoff show, and there was an episode where they kind of introduced, like you said, that Millennium Cult timeline thing or whatever that was supposed to be the part of it. And that episode, I believe, is where he made his.
Yeah, and then he was also on Dark Skies, which was hilarious because another thing about Art is that he was very opinionated, but he also kind of, if he liked something, there was always a kind of an implication that, you needed to reach out and kind of thank Art for, like, if he supported a show or an author.
Right, yeah.
And he talked, there was a short, because when the X-Files kind of came out, all of a sudden people are like, oh, you fucking geeks like this alien shit? Let's get like 50,000 alien invasion shows onto television. So one of the ones, I think it was NBC, did one called Dark Skies, and it was a set in the 50s in the heyday of, Project Blue Book, when the government literally was spending your tax dollars investigating this swamp gas or whatever.
Very important.
But so he very famously, when that, people would always go, Art, don't you love the X-Files? It's all the stuff you're talking about. It's conspiracies, and I've never been a big fan of the X-Files. I really like Dark Skies. And it was like this thing
my brand,
where it's like he kind of knew that it had, like, too much time had passed for him to get involved in X-Files. But Dark Skies, they were probably looking for a way to boost their thing. And of course, Art Bell showed up on an episode of Dark Skies, but it didn't make it past the first season. But again, Art did eventually end up playing himself, of all people, on the X-Files. So it's like he became kind of, but he'd have interesting people on the show. When he got a little more famous, he had like Waylon Jennings on there, or no, I'm sorry, Merle Haggard. Merle Haggard was on there, and I think he had George Carlin on one time. So it was kind of a lot of, you know, interesting personality. So it wasn't always. It was generally, it was supernatural and weird stuff. He would get one of the things that I think made his show a little different for the time, at least. Maybe now this is much more common, but he never really grilled his guests very hard. It was kind of like a thing. He would allow them to either hoist themselves on their own petard and look like idiots, but he would never point it out. He kind of left it. He would definitely try to keep the interview moving along, try to keep it interesting, but he would rarely, I don't think he had much of a thing, like he would never try to get anybody.
No, he wasn't. I think one of the brilliant things about the show was he provided this open platform, and for anyone who had a wild idea about something or strongly believed in something that was sort of out of the mainstream, and by not challenging or attacking those people, he encouraged the participation, and it kind of gave him this endless line of new guests and whatnot, because people felt like, you know, Art Bell's the only guy who's going to give my idea, my belief, my conspiracy or whatever, the respect and the time that it deserves. And like you say, most of those people talk themselves into looking like fools, but he never had the reputation of being cruel or dismissive or otherwise, you know, picking fights with his guests or whatnot. He just would ask a series of questions, like you say, to keep it moving along. And most of the time people just kind of look dumb at the end. But there's the few that didn't, you know, it's like, hey, that was a great show. Like, wow, man, that's something, you know, as a listener, you're like, well, I might look into that or check it out. But I guess he kind of allowed, like you say, he just allowed people to hang themselves with their own rope in a way.
Yeah, and it just became this thing where he didn't, you know, as long as you kind of paid respects to him, because again, when I wind this up, I'll talk about some of the feuds that he had, but which were very public and stuff, and actually partly led to him leaving. He quit his show many times, partly for personal tragedies, and then later just for, I think he wasn't able to keep up with new media, and it created these weird situations for him. But some of the more famous people that you would if you ever want, and I might put up a little in the show notes. I'm going to put up maybe a little playlist, because there's definitely some clips on YouTube, and maybe I'll put together a little playlist for listeners that maybe want to dip in. One of them was the famous call over Area 51, where this guy calls in very emphatically, like, I don't know how long I'm going to have to say. I'm in an airplane. I'm flying over Area 51. And it's like, you know, and he'll go, really, this is absolutely fascinating. Let's, you know, make sure you keep your eye on the fuel gauge and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, like, the call would cut off. There was one person where there was a guy that had called in, and he had kind of claimed to have escaped from some government facility. And what people really don't know is and it was kind of the same. It might even have been the same
Probably
guy.
The same guy, yeah.
It was like, we've made a deal with the aliens from Alpha Centauri that we're giving them our low class people, and they're using them for hybrid experiments. And then all of a sudden, like
clearly they haven't made it to Tacoma.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Well, what the best thing about that one is either I don't know what happened. Obviously, I wasn't there. But everything, when he was like, this guy was giving it the whole what for about, you know, the secret government, because everything on his board died. Like, his power at his house went out, the phone cut out,
right,
and he was off the air for like 45 minutes. And then they rebooted it, and then he was like, I didn't do anything. I don't know why. All of a sudden, this guy was giving the truth. The power went out for 40 minutes. And that was a continuing theme when he loved to play into like technical problems.
Right.
He'd never come out and say it's the government trying to shut me down, but he'd say, I don't know. could it have been? And that kind of thing.
Coincidence?
I'm not saying anything. And it got to be kind of, you know, it was very fun. I'll be honest, and I'm embarrassed to even say this. It could get a little scary sometimes, only because...
What's the time of day?
Well, at the time, it was late at night, and when I was that age, I was in college, and I was insomniac, and I definitely didn't sleep enough, and I'm the kind of person that if you only get like 4 or 5 hours of sleep, I can get a little nutty.
Right.
And that coupled with like this kind of like...
with a conspiracy show for 4 hours every night.
Yeah. Especially when they would get into like these things like, you know, the Hale-Bopp comet. There was this kind of, there's a companion. And then they get into these ideas of, I mean, some of this stuff is actually, the supernatural aspects I'm not speaking to, but things that were real, like remote viewing. There really was a government program where the U.S. Army sent a group of people to a room on like Fort Bragg or on some army base. They would literally go into a room and spend all day staring at goats, trying to make the goats have heart attacks just by staring at them. And John Ronson has a book called The Men Who Stare at Goats, which
made a movie of that, didn't it?
Yeah, and it's unfortunately seeing the movie only has most of it's completely fictitious. They added a narrative of the character.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I would suggest the book because actually Art Bell is mentioned and some of the controversies therein. But yeah, Art used to have a guy named Major Ed Dames come on who is mentioned in this book, and he would constantly talk about he was in Hawaii and he was going to go move into a cave because something was going to come out of the Hale-Bopp comet, and it was going to decimate all plant life on the earth. And it's like, yes, in retrospect, it seems very silly, but you know, this is a time, you know, where people say things and you're like, you know, there was no Snopes. There was no, and even though people have said Snopes isn't what it's all cracked up to be anymore, but that's
but there was nobody out there being the arbiter of truth and fact checking.
The internet was not such a great part of our life where like it was a 24/7 thing where people start talking and then someone points out, well, did you hear what he said? That's completely physically impossible, or this is bullshit.
Right.
Where it's like this thing. I mean, I'm not saying that I ever packed a bag or got, you know, stuff, but it was this thing you would spend time afterwards at 2 a.m. thinking to yourself, you couldn't sleep, and like, what if there's a small chance that it's true? You know, this guy, like, he literally was a, you know, even in retrospect, at the time, I didn't know if he was completely lying about his military history. Now people know he actually was. I mean, I will say that program wasn't necessarily the cutting edge thing where it was kind of, they were like saying, hey, let's spend a couple $1 million on this and see what happens. And nothing happened, and they fired everybody. And they all had careers talking about, I used to remote view looking for Saddam Hussein and all this stuff. Yeah, but at the time, and also like weird things would happen. So like in, you know, around the time of like Ruby Ridge and Waco, Texas, you know, there had been kind of a very strong kind of undercurrent of anxiety towards the government and about like people with, you know, as it seems to come in cycles, but without getting too much into current day stuff, they talked Art would talk a lot about government. The government isn't your friend, and the government, you can't trust the government. And then, you know, it would get, so he'd have a lot of kind of, extreme, I can't even think. I mean, he'd had hundreds of guests, but he would vacillate. So it wouldn't always be ghosts and UFOs and stuff. And sometimes it would just be like New World Order type stuff. And, you know, that was not necessarily my favorite of the stuff. I kind of preferred the more fanciful stuff, the New World Order stuff, considering you're seeing, you know, like what happened at Waco. And even then it's like, you're seeing like, okay, well, he's speaking on things that are actually happening. This is a little creepy.
Well, that's the thing is that when he talked about things like that, that was probably the scariest, because you could look out your window and see it happening. Like you got some guy calling in, he's a long haul trucker, and he's somewhere in Kansas, and he's like, I saw an angel, and you're like, oh yeah, well tell me about that. Oh, is that the truck stop? And you're like, no, that was just a yard whore. But anyway, but But then you start to hear him talking about, and others, talking about these government conspiracies and all this stuff. And at one point, everybody dismissed all that shit. And they're like, there's no government conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. And then Waco happens, and then everybody kind of looks around and says, well, wait a minute. And it becomes very real, and it's on the news. And then he has some people on late at night, and you're like, oh shit. And that's when it, like you said, that's when it kind of starts to get real and get scary.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, you do kind of get into this, you can end up getting in this mode of thinking where you feel like, and I guess that still continues to this day for a lot of people, that they always feel like, oh, I got the inside track on this because I'm in tune with it.
Right.
And art definitely played up for that for a long time, until it kind of not really backfired, but stuff really started happening that kind of put the light on kind of this conspiratorial view of the world. And really, it was the first time I noticed it as a listener was when the Oklahoma City bombing happened.
Right. Because
art had paid a lot of lip service to this idea of, militia, keep, almost like a doomsday prepper, get, it's your rights, get as many guns as you want, you go, if you want to go out and practice scenarios and things like that, that's your right. And, whatever you think about that, there is a kind of this thing where now you've got all these guests and he's not being particularly critical of them because that's not the kind of show. It was entertainment. And then something very, very real happens. And when things like that would happen, all of a sudden art would kind of contract and he would stop talking about that stuff. So
let's go back to the angels at the
truck
stop.
And then he would start to kind of go into this, like Mel's Hole, which is another one of the when I think of the stuff that makes me wistful and happy and remember is like Mel's Hole, which is a fictitious, sorry guys, hole in Eastern Washington that this guy named Mel would call up and talk about how he had this hole and he threw a refrigerator down it and he never heard it hit the ground, and he had cord and he had been unraveling cord and he'd already put 4 miles of cord out and it's still tension on the line, and there might be, I've heard sounds come of it. I've, things of, we put something down there and it came back and it's magnetic properties are different. And he'd call in about once a month and he'd get people so wound up. And again, this is before Google Earth. This is before, tax documents.
Right.
And you can look at any plot of land in the state if you want on the internet.
Exactly.
So it's just this, it operates in this zone of almost willful ignorance, because you're like, yeah, I could go down and look this up, but it's more fun to hear about Mel's Hole.
Well, and it was in an era when the looking up part, the fact checking part, was actual work.
Yeah,
like you didn't just, like you say, you didn't just hop online and Google a dude's yard and find out what the county assessor values it at, and all that kind of stuff, where you can grab all that out of the ether in about 30 seconds. You had to go down to the county office and you had to, pay money and get them to look something up and show it to you and print it off. And who had time for that shit? I mean, you're up all night listening to this guy. I mean, you get sleep during the day.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And to be perfectly honest, when you, at some point, aside from the actual like government conspiratorial stuff that kind of was more disturbing, like you said, the ghost stuff, it was fun, because there's always a part of you that's like, this is bullshit. This is all bullshit. But then there was always just enough to make you go, people say, you don't want to be the guy that constantly says, nope, no way, no how.
Right.
And then you're the one that's wrong. But I had always had an interest in this stuff as a kid. So it definitely played into that kind of thinking. What was some of the other people that he had on there was really great. Now I'm just blanking. He had like, I'm blanking on it. It's this guy that claimed that he worked at Area 59. It's like Bob Lazier or something like that. And, it was just very much like they would just come on in a very matter-of-fact way. Oh, John Titor. Oh, this is a guy. he called in and claimed that he was a time traveler. He had been sent from like 30
from the future.
30. I am from the future. My name is John Titor. I'm he was like part of an advanced scouting team that had been sent from like 80 or 70 years in the future, had been sent back. There's actually, and you can Wikipedia John Titor. He's I don't know if they ever established who he was or anything, if he was ever actually like gave a name or a photo or anything, but he definitely would call into these like shows, Art show, and talk all about like, oh, well, in the future, this, and very much like.
Doesn't he know about the Prime Directive?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, and those were always the best because you definitely knew that was bullshit, you know, and then like, there's not, you didn't really have to sit around and go, well, I got to give this, this whole idea
I'll
of
go
like,
look that up later.
well, I saw this picture. I saw this. I mean, because that's the thing. A lot of these guests, like, okay, so it was kind of in the birth of the internet, but getting on the internet wasn't necessarily like, yeah, there was AOL and stuff like that in 93, 94, but a computer was like, you had to have a computer. And you had to have internet, and that's like $2,000 for a computer. So a lot of times you'd be like, you go over to somebody's house, you'd be like, "Can I use your internet?" And you want to like, I want to go to the Art Bell site. I want to see what Art Bell site looks like, which But yeah, John Titor was another great one. Oh geez, I'm really embarrassed. Like somebody's probably, I should have made a list of them. But there was Courtney Brown, who was he's one of the guys that ended up getting in a kind of him and Art had a falling out partly because of this remote viewing stuff. I don't remember if Courtney Brown was he comes up a lot in the John Ronson book, The Men Who Stare at Goats, because unfortunately, after the kind of the militia version of Art Bell, where he was very kind of, soft giving support to militia, he had moved back into the paranormal, but it came into this idea that this Hale Bopp had a companion. And I mentioned that before, that if you looked really close at the radio telescope, and that's why I would go to his site to see like,
the pictures from the radio
the
telescope.
companion. You have to look at the companion. It's coming. And you're like, well, that actually looks like something. What is that? I'm like, I don't know. I'm an English lit major. I don't know. I don't know
how to read these things.
I don't know science.
Right.
Maybe somebody say, oh, it's shadow or it's outgassing or whatever. I don't know what it was. But they would talk about it very much as, like this Courtney Brown would come on and go, oh, Art, in Major Ed Deems, I remote viewed it. It's by this time next year, we're all going to be eating each other because that's, all of our food will be gone. Again, you're starting to get, it's all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I'm not thinking about, government overreach. Now I'm just worried about like some weird
surviving.
Yeah. It's like this. And again, it's like, that kind of stuff is in the ether, and you're consuming the X-Files, and it's like everybody. It's like, hey, it's Jonathan Frakes, like Beyond Belief. It's like that was
the alien autopsy video.
Yeah, the alien autopsy video. I'm not saying that I believed any. I'm just saying that even if you don't believe in this stuff, one of the byproducts of kind of dipping your toes or your whole foot or whatever into this crazy shit I've found, and maybe I'm exposing some big problem with my psyche, is it's like that whole thing that the Nietzsche quote about staring into the abyss, and sometimes the abyss stares back into you.
That's true.
It starts to make you start to get a little like, oh geez, I'm getting a little weird. I think I need to back off of it. And again, Art would do that. And the thing with the Hale Bopp thing is a group of people, the Heaven's Gate cult,
they want to
all committed suicide waiting, because that's the way they only thought that they could. Marshall Applewhite and et al., including Nichelle Nichols' brother and all these people that had been involved in this cult, that they all took, the poison s'mores or whatever, and they're
way better than grape Kool-Aid.
Yeah, and their sneakers, and they all died in, rows of down in a what was it, a bunker or something, assuming that if they left their earthly form, that they would transmit right up
to the comet,
the comet and thing, and it's like
carried away.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, none of this came to pass.
Well, we don't know. They never came back.
That is true. I remember SNL did a great skit one time where they would all just like where it was like, oh, we actually have got a transmission. They're like, hey, we made it to the next rotation or whatever. And it's like Tim Meadows was like, yeah, I was really skeptical about cutting my dick off, but I'm really glad I did. Something like that. And you're just like, but that kind of unfortunately had some blowback on Art because he had really, really given a lot of heat to that. I mean, ultimately, I feel with these sort of things, and again, I don't want to get too much into current day issues with maybe the children of art or whatever, the people that have arisen past art that speak in, that truck in conspiracy theory and whatever. And there was this kind of, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of the opinion where it's like, this is, you got to keep your skeptical mind, even on the days that I would get, with 4 hours of sleep because I was in college and I wasn't taking care of myself. And then you get a little weird in the head because you've been spending too much time thinking about it. It's like, even then you eventually have to go, hey, let's be real about this. Like, what? But I think not long after that, Art he had unfortunately kind of like a personal issue with his son. And you can read the Wikipedia about it. His son had been assaulted by a teacher and he may have been exposed to AIDS, and Art kind of said my family's more important to me than this show. And he needed to do that. So he jumped off the show and left. And that was kind of like the end of that first era, which was like about 6 or 7 years of that stuff. And I think he was gone for about 6 to 8 months, and then he came back. And then it became this thing over time, unfortunately, where Art would come on, and if anything happened that he wasn't happy with, he would leave. He'd just quit.
Right.
And,
very tantrumy.
Yeah, he could be a bit like that. And he had gotten into it, again, with one of his own guests. This Courtney Brown character had kind of, what was it? It was like, oh, I remote viewed, or one of my remote viewers remote that Art had been. It brought up an accusation that he had tried. I think what it was had something to do with what had happened to Art's son. Had got disseminated into the public, and this Courtney Brown tried to make it sound like I did a remote viewing that says that Art had exposed himself to a child or something like that.
Oh, Jesus.
And it,
yeah.
And Art is like, screw this. I'm not going to be on this I'm not going to do this anymore. And he left. And that was, I want to say that was like for a long time. That's kind of.
Well, wasn't that when George Norrie took over?
Yeah, George Norrie took over. And then, of course, Coast to Coast changed. I always forget the show was called Coast to Coast.
Right.
I just call it the Art Bell Show.
Right. No, it was Coast to Coast.
But really, it was Coast to Coast AM, and then there was Dreamland, or it had Dreamland on Sundays, and then when he would play his reruns, they were Somewhere in Time.
Right.
And that's because that was the funny thing. He had these weird tics about, or not weird, little obsessions, like the Barbara Hershey movie, The Entity. You ever seen that movie?
No.
It's a really weird late 70s, early 80s movie about a poltergeist that Barbara Hershey is repeatedly sexually assaulted by a ghost. And it's actually a very harrowing, it's a very odd concept of a movie. So I'm not recommending the movie, but it's a really brutal ghost story.
Okay.
And he was always like, and every time you have a guest on and they talk about poltergeist, and he'd always go, have you seen The Entity? Because he goes, that movie is the most terrifying film I've ever seen. And it was like this thing where he would always bore his guests with that. And what was the other one he had? Oh, shit. But he also, he had his music too. His theme song was "The Chase" by Giorgio Moroder, which was the song used in Midnight Express. I think it's the bum 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 bum. Anyway, he had that. He had his signature tunes. He'd also play a lot from this.
I would bet you when more people who hear that song think of the radio show.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It took me years to find out that was something it wasn't just his theme music. he used to love to play stuff by Cusco, which was
Okay.
kind of like a new age artist that did. I don't know if he was Peruvian or not, but I don't know if it was one guy or it was a group. But it was like a lot of like pan flute stuff between the
jeez.
stuff. So every time it's like
Oh,
you,
man.
and it was like he would play that, and he'd play Midnight at the Oasis by Maria Moldauer
Wow.
all the time. And oh gosh, he had like these weird Crystal Gale. He had this weird fascination with Crystal Gale, where he finally got her on the show, and I think she recorded a song for him called Midnight in the Desert, or she already had a song and it was his unofficial theme song.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
later on when he finally did come back, I think he used that term. But he was very much a personality, and it was kind of, again, he was moody, and he would do these things like came back. And when he did finally leave, when George Norrie took over, it was kind of, George was not my cup of tea. He was, Art would ask good questions, but George just he'd never even seemed to be listening to his guest. He had more of the kind of, because as time has gone on, it's, not very profitable to have, it's not fun to have a lot of this government conspiracy type stuff. And, he would go more into this thing like about ancient aliens, and he'd have Giorgio Tsoukalos on and people like that. And I kind of just lost interest in it. It was kind of, Art had a way of doing a show that was like, and maybe it's like the thing where you can never go home again. And it's like, I want it the way, I want my Star Wars this way. I want my Art Bell
And
this
we're
way.
back.
And I want my Star Trek this way.
Yep. It's true.
It's that, I'm not going to deny it.
Yeah.
But so Art did come back to Sirius about 4 or 5 years ago. And I did something that I never thought I'd do. I went and got a Sirius subscription.
Wow.
Because I was
That's
so
bold.
excited about Art Bell
Yeah.
coming back to Sirius that I thought, it's like that. Well, again, it's that thing where it's like people always say like, hey, if HBO just started doing a la carte, I'd stop pirating Game of Thrones. And then when it comes out, you go, it's so easy just to pirate Game of Thrones.
Right.
And I'm trying to be better about that. And I got my HBO subscription. And then when Art came back, I didn't just look for the podcast, look for a feed or something. I spent my $10 or whatever. Dude did not even make it a month, and
Oh,
he
man.
quit. And it was partly because, and the thing that I probably didn't impress very well is that he had this thing called open lines. He'd have his east of the Rockies and his west of the Rockies.
Yep.
And it was kind of the wild card line. And you'd
Yep.
call on and like, Art, I want to tell you I got a pussy cat that can read my mind. That kind of stuff. It was always...
It's just like watching QVC.
Yeah, it wasn't always dire and, thinking like we're all going to die. A lot of it was fun.
Right.
And, he'd have the Lutzes on from the Amityville Horror. And that wasn't necessarily, well, it wasn't fun, but it was like, and, and the best thing was, and this was the thing that I tried to always, even if I would go into a thing like, I'm done with Art Bell, I'm not listening to him anymore. It just keeps me up at night, stresses me out. So I would actually quit listening a lot because I'd think like, how much time do I want to spend with this stuff? But I would always check in on October 31st because he'd have Ghost to Ghost. And what he would do is he'd
Nice.
basically have people come in and just tell like your scariest ghost stories. And they were, always top notch. It was, sometimes it was the whole like, I just wanted to come by and thank the old man for the gardening advice. What are you talking about? He's been dead for 20 years, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
A lot of that kind of
Straight out of your kids' books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, the serious thing, a lot of that is the fact that he would get truckers and people calling in all manner of night. And the thing with Sirius is that I guess you did get a lot of truckers because that's basically the only people that are supporting Sirius now are truckers.
Pretty much. Yeah. New car buyers.
Yeah, if someone's it's kind of like
For 3 months.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Star Trek Discovery thing is that you're only dealing with people that are behind the paywall, and it's a very small intellectual well, and it
Mhm.
and he tried to get a deal going, and he wasn't thinking when he signed his deal that he didn't realize that without that steady diet of callers, that a lot of the excitement and the kind of stuff wasn't there. And he tried to get Sirius to do a thing where they go, well, at least let me stream the show live. You know, obviously no replays. Only way you can get a replay is if you're a Sirius person. And the Sirius is like, no,
because
it's like
that undermines our business model.
Yeah, and he got mad and he just quit.
Jeez.
And he had signed a 2-year non-compete. So even though he acted like he was like, well, I'm going to go do something else, he couldn't for 2 years. And, you know, I had to, call up Sirius and go, yeah, I'd like to cancel my subscription. Why?
Art Bell
quit. Like, geez, you're a real spaz, aren't you? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But then, like,
the angels at the truck stop told me to quit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then almost 2 years to the date, he came back with another. God, what was that last one? His last incarnation. And I think it was just called like Midnight in the Desert, or maybe that was the Sirius show. I don't know. He did come back.
Was it also on Sirius? Or?
No, it was a
regular.
It was radio? It was a streaming thing because he'd owned this Nye or whatever K9 or something. It was a radio station in Pahrump, and in the interim after he'd left, he had sold the radio station, so he didn't have the same technology. So he actually would transmit over an ISDN line.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And that was a streaming service situation that was going to be ad supported, and I don't know the whole, here, what was what, but I don't think it was profitable. So all of a sudden he claimed that somebody had taken a pot shot at him on his property. Like he'd heard a bullet go by his ear. And it was just like basically that whole, I'm getting too close to the truth and they don't want me. Which,
right. Yeah.
And then he quit, and that was his final. And again, he had come and gone a number of times, but that was the final thing. And unfortunately, the media landscape had changed a lot, and there are a lot of podcasts and shows, and and to be honest, a lot of the space that he operated in is kind of where Alex Jones operates in now. And so a lot of it wasn't as novel as it had been, and I think he thought that he had a little bit more power or
cachet or something.
Yeah, cachet in the thing. And a lot of people after he left Sirius were like, I'm done. I can't, I bought a fucking Sirius radio, right, and you didn't, like, I thought we could relive the 90s again, and like you're being, you're complaining about, this and that and the other thing, and you're just ditching us for no reason. And he'd actually get very defensive when people would call him out on the internet. He wasn't like a Twitter guy or anything, or
right.
Facebook.
Yeah.
But near the end of his run, he did get much more, much more vocal on the internet. But then when he finally did pull the thing again under the auspices that the government doesn't want me to tell you the truth about this, he tried to keep it going with, guest hosts and other paranormal stuff. But then people were like, this is being done better other places.
Well, I mean, Nori at that time had pretty much established himself as, the heir apparent to the Coast to Coast crown.
Yeah.
And he was doing it regularly and better than anybody else. And with Bell jumping in and out, and then, like you say, trying to hand off whatever his latest creation was to somebody else, people are like, I'll just go listen to Coast. And,
yeah.
I mean, for the old hardcore overnight AM people,
Yeah, and it's like, that's the thing. It's like, you can just turn it on and it's on. I mean, they still play. I think George Norrie is still on Cairo FM at 10 o'clock at night.
Oh, so he's on FM. Okay.
Yeah, there's really no
All right,
AM.
I'm back in.
Yeah, so, it's, again, it's like he created a genre. And then it's like anything, you stay around long enough, you find yourself kind of being aged out of it.
Well, he's kind of almost like he's almost like the George Lucas of overnight radio or whatever, right? Like at one point there was nothing,
right?
And he came with this very unique and interesting format and like you say, gave voice to all kinds of weird shit that normal people weren't really talking about around the water cooler at work. And he started it all. And the problem with being the first guy to do something is that you either have to continue to be the first guy or the next guy is going to pass you. And he got the most he possibly could out of the medium and the topic. But the thing about him was that he grabbed onto all that when it was still out of the mainstream. And that gave him sort of the cachet that initially that he had. Like, he was the only guy doing this, and he could position himself as, I'm the risk taker. I'm out here, I'm working for you guys, I'm finding the truth and all this stuff. And then as it became more acceptable in the mainstream, and we did start to get shows like The X-Files and things like that, where people were, I want to say seriously, but they were addressing these topics in an entertainment format that was serious. And more and more people started to go, oh yeah, well that makes total sense. Or, and that's why we have on the History Channel, we have, Ancient Aliens now, and it's so prevalent. These are the people that have come and taken what he's done, refined it, reshaped it, repackaged it, learned from his mistakes, and have carried it forward. And like you say, I mean, it's sad. It's sad. Like, we see a lot of innovators and a lot of, pioneers and things aged out and, dying poor or unappreciated or, things like that. And it's difficult because these are the people that got us where we need to be, or got us to the current state of whatever it is that, that we're into. And we look at that, I'm not saying that George Lucas is hurting or whatever, but it's like, but look at what his fan base did to him. Like, it folded back in on him and ate him,
right,
and ran him out of making movies, and ultimately, in his mind, forced him to sell the franchise. Bell benefited from a couple of things. One, he was the first, and two, he did it in an era where it was extremely difficult for you to not necessarily prove him wrong, but it was very
offer contradictory.
It was very difficult, to come with something that would refute what was being said. And like you say, everything you did, there was always that sliver of, well, it's probably 90% bullshit, but that 10% or 5% or whatever it is in the back of your mind kept you coming back the next time and say, well, what else is he going to talk about? Or what's the next chapter in the story? And I didn't hear a lot of Bell. I kind of got on the tail end of him on Coast to Coast, and I moved forward with Nori, and I just stayed with that. And, I listened to him for years, and it was kind of a fun thing, like being on road trips and whatnot, going across country or whatever. It was always fun trying to find him on the AM, and listen to that. But I'm a huge fan of the Ancient Aliens show, and all those people, owe Art Bell a debt, because, here's Giorgio Tsoukalos flying around the world and looking all sexy with his hairdo. And, even Nori shows up on the show. And like you say, all those people who were his guests and the people who were, early on, got their message out through Art Bell, and who are now, reaping the benefits through Alien Con and through all that other stuff. It's like, totally owe him that debt of gratitude, because he's the one who paved the way for them to become legitimate.
Yeah. I mean, and it is big business now. I mean, it's, every time I go down to my mom's place down on the coast, there's like at the Quinault casino, they're having, Bigfoot Fest or UFO Fest. And it's, it's like, I'll be honest, when I go out on the weekends, and it's like, more times often than not, I see ads for some kind of, cryptids and all this stuff, even though it's like, I'm not, by no means am I saying that this stuff is real or anything, but I'm saying, but
you're not saying it isn't either.
But I mean, there is something to be said about they say there's been the least, in the last 70 years that people have reported UFOs. Like, no more, now that we're the most able to document almost every aspect of our daily lives within a few seconds with a couple swipes of your thumb.
Right.
We've had the least amount of, people.
The photographs have suddenly stopped.
Yeah, all of a sudden these photographs have started. stopped. I mean, and it's like, it's like a lot of these people have compartmentalized into their. It's like whereas art was a kind of a a potpourri of different weird things. Now people specialize. So now you have Zach Bagans. He just does ghosts and angry ghosts. And Alex Jones just did the government stuff. Really. Right. And, and George Norrie tends to do more of the supernatural and very steers clear of like, because, he
definitely stays out of the politics.
Yeah. Because, when Art had left, there was a couple people that they would fill in on the weekends. Like, and I would dip in occasionally and go, there was a guy named John B. Wells, and it was all fun and stuff. But then all of a sudden he starts pushing the, 9/11 was a hologram. And you're just like, this isn't even fun. And that's probably kind of the reason why, so-and-so isn't very fun because of the things that he pushes. There's no fun, except when he goes on one of his rants or whatever. But yeah, it just kind of created this thing where like a lot of people thought like, well, I can't just copy him, so I'm just going to pick one aspect of what Coast to Coast did and maybe develop it and stuff. And again, we're living in a time where information is a lot, yes, there's a lot of bad information being disseminated in the world, but we've never been in a time in history where the potential to actually get good information or at least learn some good critical thinking skills. At least I would hope that we do live in that time. Maybe we don't, but
probably not.
I'm optimistic that the kids will be that he'll grow up with having, not only the internet their entire lives, but like internet in your pocket their entire lives. Maybe their critical thinking skills will be up, or maybe I'm full of shit, but it's the byproduct of that is that the fun kind of stuff is like, you could never have the Art Bell show in its form now.
No, not in the way it was. No,
yeah. And it's obviously an art past. And the sad thing that I learned last week is it was a very real problem that took him out. It wasn't the government. It wasn't aliens. It wasn't Bigfoot. It was an accidental opioid overdose or a thing. So it was like, he was a smoker, and I think he had COPD, and that was definitely an issue with him. And, his wife had died and from an asthma attack and all this stuff. So they all had respiratory issues, and then he remarried, and he actually had a very young daughter, and I think he had another kid on the way. So it was kind of he wasn't actively working on a show, but he had put up photos and stuff like that on Facebook and stuff, and he looked relatively healthy for himself. But unfortunately, he must have had some medical issues that he had a drug interaction and it killed him. And it's like, that's obviously the sad thing is that's when you really want to get down to the real. That's the real. People are dying that way. It's not conspiracy theories.
You would almost hope that it would be exposed as some kind of like the government finally silenced him.
And I don't,
yes,
and I don't spend
he's right.
I don't spend a lot of time in that world anymore, just because it's not fun anymore. But I'm sure there's somebody on a subreddit or 4chan or some message board where, they're like, oh yeah, real convenient. They sent in, I know guys in a special, unit where all they do is, do opioid overdoses for people that know too much. I mean, they probably took out Margot Kidder too, and it's just like, oh, come on.
You know what though? In a way to me, that's almost, I mean, it kind of warms my heart in a way that like the Art Bell effect is still there, like that it's still that the people are out there still trying to create the conspiracy or the controversy, even when the facts are clearly there. It's something else, but it's almost like way to keep it going, guys. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's the weird thing about conspiracy theories, because all it really needs to be, like, if let's say we'll have 100 conspiracy theories, if just one of them is right, that is literally enough.
Oh yeah,
and I'll be honest. On some metrics, it's enough even for me to go like, well, I'm not going to completely shut out these things. I'm definitely going to have my skeptical cap on and set to 100.
Right.
But once in a while, people said things about, and I'm not talking about government, but people were talking about Bill Cosby for years before all that happened. And all of a sudden, it's like people, 20 years ago, people would say, "Oh, what are you, conspiracy theory? Or Bill Cosby conspiracy theories, or your Bryan Singer conspiracy theories, or
Right.
your Harvey Weinstein's?" And again, that's Hollywood, and art didn't deal in that kind of stuff except when he had famous people on and stuff. Did you ever come across his book?
No, I have not. No.
He did 3 books, but one was The Art of Talk, which he would always pimp on his show, and that was a book that I say a lot of things that I would never say on the air. So it was always like teaser, like,
Oh, right.
he's probably
Get
like
the real Art Bell.
yeah, it's
right?
like, he's probably talking shit about his ex-wife or something like that,
Totally.
that kind of stuff. I almost bought it. I saw it at half price, and I was just like, it was like 10 years past the sell-by date in my mind. But I do, because it was $1, and I bought it I do have a signed copy. I treasure this now.
Nice.
Of The Quickening. Have you ever heard Art Bell's The Quickening?
No, but I am familiar with The Quickening from another movie, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was kind of that similar thing, and I think he stole it from The Highlander.
Oh.
But it was his idea, which, again, I didn't read the book. I'll admit this. I have the book. I've had it for a long time. I'm like, I was listening to the guy like 12 hours a week anyway. Do I really need to read the book too? I was trying to piece together a lit degree, but I did get the book, and it's just his theory that, everything is speeding up. Well, of course everything is speeding up. But he kept on this idea that we were speeding towards this plateau of something. But I don't know if he ever actually posits his theory. I know he also wrote another book about, the quickening. Things are speeding up. I have this theory. And that was another thing about where he would ask people. He'd go, I have a theory, and I call it the quickening. And he would go into this. I mean, everybody has their pet theories. It's like, and actually with Joe Rogan, he trucks this, not a conspiracy theory, but he's always like, he always likes to tell guests, like when he has science people on or something, like he thinks that we're on the cusp of a new form of communication. That's why
like emojis?
Well, like, yeah, basically like the internet. It's like the internet has caused this thing. Like we are reforming, and the truth of the matter, we're reforming our connections of how we communicate. Because now it's like we're all, in 20 years we're all going to be like David, and our friend David, who only speaks in GIFs.
Yeah.
But
that's true.
And it's like that kind of thing. And the quickening was a bit of that. And then he also did the coming global superstorm, which was, I swear to gosh, had something to do with that movie Geostorm or something like that.
Or the movie was based on that, or
yeah. I think it was. It was, Larry Niven, who did like the Ringworld books.
Yeah.
I think they worked on that together. So he used to have Larry Niven on his show all the time. So he would occasionally have like sci-fi writers,
Right.
great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like this thing how basically, I don't know, and I'm probably putting 3 or 4 different guests together, but it was this idea like, there was going to be like this major polar shift and all that stuff.
Right.
And then there was a one person who trucked this idea that the jet stream was going to drop down to like sea level, and that we were literally going to have jet stream winds blowing across the earth.
Right. Yeah, it's a scour the earth or whatever. Yeah.
And that kind of stuff. But again, hundreds of other things. Also, a couple other places that you might have found Art Bell out in pop culture is some clips of his show appeared in a video game for Xbox 360 called Prey. Now there's 2 video games called Prey. It's not the one that's kind of an outer space game, but this does deal with alien invasion. Has something to do with it was like a Native American mythology mixed with alien stuff, and you play like a Native American character who is taken on board a alien ship, and you can walk around the ship, and then you push a button, and it'll actually like play clips of Art Bell.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which I wish I had kept the game, but I sold it in a purge of video games just for how ridiculous it is. You're walking around this alien ship where it's like every worst possible scenario. Like it's like if you'd ever had you ever seen the movie DB Sweeney was in it. Oh, I'm sorry, it's an alien abduction movie. It's like one of the ones, Fire in the Sky.
Oh, right. Fire. Okay.
Like that kind of thing where it's just like you get on the ship and it's just like, what's all this stuff on the ground? It's people that we are done with. We just throw it on the ground. It's like that kind of stuff. And then also Art was
quasi horror.
Well, you know, Art he used to have Travis Walton from that show on all the time. And Travis Walton, you know, I mean, he's full of shit. But the thing is, like, he tells a great story. And before you could look it up, it's like part of you are like, hey, man, if there's just a 1% chance that this guy is right, this is terrifying. Because, I mean, I had read, you know, Whitley Strieber's Communion and The Uninterrupted Journey, which is the Barney and Betty Hill case from the late 60s, where they were one of the first people that they claimed that they had gotten abducted by aliens. There's a great movie, I think it's on YouTube, version of it where James Earl Jones plays Barney Hill, and the woman that played Roseanne's mother plays the wife. I forget her name. And then Dannion Brinkley, he was another guy. His whole big thing was he had come back near death experiences.
Oh, right, yeah.
And they'd made some crappy, you know, TV movies with Eric Roberts. And it's like, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of these people that were on his show, they would turn around and they'd get like a Fox 13 or Fox affiliate, Fox TV movie of the week kind of thing.
Right.
So you would be
he launched some careers.
It would kind of, it was like a feedback loop in some ways. Like you'd watch it, and then again, Alien Autopsy. There were so many of these Alien Autopsy videos, and trust me, I was, you know, me and my friends. This wasn't just me in the basement, I promise, but it was me and
my friend's basement.
In our friend's basement, and you know, watching that stuff, and it was like, in retrospect, it was a pretty good time, to be honest. You know, my couple sleepless nights where I would worry and I'd wake up and feel silly the next day, notwithstanding, we had a lot of fun doing that. And I think the last time I saw Art Bell in any piece of media was, and it was a great cameo in, you know, check your used bins because I haven't seen it on streaming, the movie I Know Who Killed Me, which is a cinematic classic starring Ms. Lindsay Lohan.
Ooh.
And it was like kind of right when her career had kind of hit the shitter, and she is already kind of had burned a lot of bridges. And it's a weird thriller kind of movie. I can't even explain it, but there is a sequence where Art appears in the film as Art Bell, as a kind of actually not as Art Bell, but as a kind of a Rod Serling character. And
nice.
Art was a real snappy dresser. He, you know, ubiquitous cigarette, because I don't think he quit smoking until right before he died, and a black turtleneck with a pendant on his turtleneck. And he looked like
brilliant,
a complete, you know, underpaid 7th grade English teacher type wardrobe.
Nice. And
it was just like this thing like you're watching this like, hey, do you want to see the stupid Lindsay Lohan movie? I'm like, yeah, let's watch it. Is that fucking Art Bell? Oh my God. It's like, you know, that's what, and I had to go out and buy it. I paid $2, but I had to have that movie.
A bargain at twice the price.
Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to, it's like he's come and gone, and, you know, it was kind of sad because it was kind of funny. I had coming back from a visit with a friend down it lives in Coos Bay, Oregon now. And she was my go-to Art Bell. I think she's I don't want to speak to her. I won't say her name unless she thinks it's a total mischaracterization, but I think she was a bit like me in the fact that we consumed it all and we were night owls and, you know, not enough sleep and a little too much stuff on your plate. And late at night, you get a little like, I don't know, man, this could happen.
Exactly.
And there is a kind of, I will admit that, you know, I wouldn't do that now. You know, it can go wrong. If like there's just enough of you just think a little sideways, the frizz-on, as they call it, can be very fun and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Goes too far, all of a sudden you're like the loose change guys that, you know, constantly go to city council meetings and go, you know, jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams. And
right.
It's like that kind of like just go off the deep end kind of thing. It's like, you know, but yeah, he had come in anyway. We had come back. We had literally just talked about our days of listening to Art Bell late at night. We'd hang out at the Denny's, smoke cigarettes, try to solve the world's problems, get in the car, go our separate ways with the AM radio, and then have to be like the next day, did you hear Art Bell last night? Because you couldn't text people.
Well, yeah.
It's like, oh my God, it was so insane. He had so-and-so on. And like that Courtney guy, whatever guy is, he's full of shit. And then again, Richard Hoagland, it was like, we used to call him Richard Hoaxland or whatever Crystal Castle on the moon he was talking about. Or
that's awesome.
But yeah, it was just so funny that like we were just been kind of reminiscing about it. And as I was driving home or whatever from Coos Bay, I just did the quick, flip on the news app, and it had come out that he had like literally probably died when we were talking about him. It was kind of a weird bit of serendipity, but it's like, yeah, I just wanted to take a moment and kind of throw out there that, if you're interested, and again, I'll try to make a little playlist and I'll put it in the show notes of some like maybe some choice calls. Hopefully, knock on wood, those things are still up there, because I don't want to be like, I didn't make the playlist yet.
Well, the government got them.
Well, his stuff kind of goes off.
No, it's true. It comes and goes. Yeah,
it comes and goes, and it's like occasionally I'll be like, yeah, check out all the In Search Ofs are on YouTube, and then all of a sudden they're like, I went and looked, they're not on there. I'm like, son of a bitch. But
so true.
Yeah,
so true.
Well,
that's the interesting thing about, Art Bell and in him passing and or meditating on the particular event. It seems like we're at this magical place in our lives where so many of the things that we grew up with and so many of the things that have sort of been the soundtrack or the background of our lives are starting to disappear. And, some of it is, the passage of time and things just change, or it's actual people passing away, or the end of media, or end of, different eras of things. And, not to get all like, we're old and we're going to die and all this, but it is true. I mean, like, Dave Niehaus, for example, who was the announcer of the Seattle Mariners, his passing was a similarly impactful event on me, because I grew up. My father was in in the mode, and he grew up in the Great Depression era and was very much a child of the 30s and 40s, and so radio was a very important thing for him. And having lived through the advent of television, he still loved listening to the Mariners and baseball in general, but Mariners specifically on the radio. So Dave Niehaus was always on growing up and throughout my entire life. And, when he passed away, it's like, I don't necessarily not follow the Mariners any less. It's just, it's not the same,
Yeah.
And, these things are starting to become more, prevalent because, we are, mid 40-ish fellows and people who were, mid 40-ish fellows when we were young are all getting to that age of retirement and passing and whatnot. And so, it is sad, and especially like, you were clearly much more of an Art Bell person than I was. I mean, I knew of him and I didn't listen to his show, and I listened to his show actually more after he left it than before. But it is sad, and it is kind of a, you want to stop and mark the occasion and kind of acknowledge, the import and the impact. And I'm not going to talk about it on the show today, but the Anthony Bourdain passing was a big thing for me, and I know it is for a lot of people. But and we also kind of mentioned this earlier about these are celebrities, and these people don't know us from anything, and we don't really know them at all just by whatever they put forward in the public square. But they become part of your life, and they sometimes arrive at the right time, and they mean something in your in your little world. And so when they go away, whether it be naturally, unnaturally, timely, or untimely, we do have to kind of stop and say, hey, this is an important thing. It means something to me, and we need to acknowledge that. And and kind of the thing that I wanted to talk about is one of my favorite author of all time, William Gibson. He's in that age now. He's still writing, and he appears healthy and all those things, but I'm acutely aware that he is approaching the end of his creative life, and that when he ultimately either retires from writing, or is forcibly retired, that's going to be a big thing for me, because there will be no more, and we're going to have to, enjoy what has come and celebrate that stuff. But we're definitely also going to have to acknowledge the fact that it's the end of something very important. And I know it's kind of a dark way to start off on, talking about one of my favorite people, but it's just in this conversation we've been having, about Art Bell and others, it's, Gary Fisher and people like that. Like, I have that fear, I do. And I'm greedy and I want more from him, and I want books more than once every 3 or 4 years, but that's also, how you get crap writing. And that's one of the great things about William Gibson, is that, in my personal opinion, his writing is exquisite and amazing. And the only book of his, or the only writing of his that I didn't really thoroughly enjoy was a book he co-authored with another person. And so in my mental calculus, I just blame the other author.
Is that the one he did with Bruce Sterling?
Yeah, The Difference Engine.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was a good book, but it was clearly something very outside of his normal, I guess, for lack of a better word, is outside of his wheelhouse in a way. And it was a little bit wordy. It's the longest book. And I blame it on Bruce Sterling, but who's not a bad author at all.
Fuck you, Bruce Sterling.
I know. Yeah. You and Ryan Johnson go get a car, drive off a cliff. Anyway. No, I don't have bad feelings for Bruce Sterling like I do for Ryan Johnson.
Me neither. I don't really know the guy.
I don't know any of these.
I don't know Ryan Johnson either,
but I would take some joy in his.
Those
pain.
are professional ill feelings.
Yes,
I don't care what Ryan does on his day off.
That's right. But when he comes to the Lucasfilm Studios, Ryan Johnson is my enemy. But anyway, but William Gibson for me, and is this amazing author, and people refer to him as a futurist, and he doesn't really. I don't know how he would describe himself, because he's a very interesting man in the sense that he doesn't. He kind of looks at his celebrity and his success with kind of a wayward eye. He kind of feels like he's putting everybody on in a way, And it's very funny. Like he has a book called "Distrust That Particular Flavor," and it's a collection of his nonfiction essays that he's done for magazines like Wired and The Atlantic and stuff like that. And he goes all over, because he has this reputation of being the guy who predicted the future. A lot of people come to him and ask him questions like, well, what do you think the future is going to be like? And he's like, dude, the future's here. It's just not evenly distributed, And so like that was always his kind of his mantra or his catchphrase, is that the future's here. It's just not equally distributed. And he started off, the guy is interesting. His biography, where he came from and his younger life, and he was a draft dodger, and he's went to Canada and all that, and but he grew up in the South, and his experience as a child is one that has been told a million times in our circles of like George Lucas, for example, the guy who grew up in the town, who was the nerd, and it was weird and nobody liked him, and he was quiet, but he really latched on to literature and specifically science fiction. And his first novel that was published, full-length novel, Neuromancer, which was published in 1984, was considered a sea change moment in the literature of science fiction. It's about artificial intelligence. It's about computers. It's about he uses the term cyberspace. He coined that phrase. Now think about that. In 1984, the term cyberspace was created in a science fiction novel that was written on a typewriter. And this is where he established his bona fides as a futurist, because pretty much everything in that book has kind of come to pass in some capacity or another. And I mean, it was one of those things. He burst on the scene and he won all the major science fiction literature awards, the Hugo, the Nebula, things like that. And I mean, he talks about artificial intelligence. He talks about what is basically the internet, for like he calls it the Matrix, and then we'll talk about that in a second. But he talks about a shared network of computers in a virtual space, and how criminal elements and governments and corporations use that, to their advantage. And he took the crime novel, the noir fiction, of the 40s and 50s, and translated it into a science fiction future. And he and a couple of other people, Sterling and a couple of other guys, all around the same time when they started writing short stories, they came up with what became known as cyberpunk. And it was this great thing where all of the characters in his book, or in his books mostly, it gets different later on, but early on in his books, they're all anti-heroes. They're all broken people, and they're all various levels of criminal.
Yeah, because isn't the protagonist of Neuromancer, which I'm embarrassed to say is the only book I've actually read by him, but isn't the protagonist a drug addict?
Yeah. He's a cyber cowboy, was what they call it. Basically, he's a cyber criminal. He works, going into cyberspace and breaking into companies and stealing corporate data. And this is one of the great things in that era of this, the birth of cyberpunk, is there's a lot of this dystopian belief in the future that the world will be ruled by corporations, not by countries, and that traditional states will fade away against larger corporate entities that will ultimately just buy up and dissolve governments. And so these guys, they deal in the buying, selling, and trading of corporate secrets and technology and all those things. And so being able to break into corporate computers, hacking, all these things are great, criminal skills. And so there's this hierarchy of who's the best, and it's all very, I don't know, it's almost like cowboyish in a way, like who's the best of the worst. And so Case, who's the main character in Neuromancer, he's a drug addict, and he's a cowboy and all this stuff. And he winds up, how the story starts is he's fucked up as a cyberspace, criminal. He tried to keep a little for himself, which is always the way that the bad, the crime novel starts. Like, oh yeah, everything was going great when I was working for the mafia boss, and then I kept a little for myself, and now I'm, in a basement somewhere with cement shoes. And so the whole thing is that because cyberspace is like a virtual reality thing where you are wearing helmets and gloves and all that kind of stuff, like the criminal organization burns out his neural system. So he can't go into cyberspace. So everything he's ever done, he can't do now. And so he's taken to becoming a low-grade street hustler, and he's kind of doing what he was doing virtually, but doing it physically, and he's in his town in Japan. And the whole thing is he gets scooped up into this other criminal enterprise where they magically fix him. And he spent years trying to be fixed, and going to all these clinics, or they call black clinics, where there's this like medicine being practiced on the side that's not entirely legal, and he's spent all of his money trying to fix the neural damage that was done to him. And then he winds up getting picked up in this other criminal organization, and they provide him with a cure for this. And it's all, this becomes a common theme in Gibson novels, where he reaches down and he finds someone who is broken, or is at, wits end, or their last $10, and, everything's looking bad. And then they get pulled up by some larger stranger entity, and get caught up in the machinations of that. And that's where the adventure comes from. And then ultimately everybody winds up okay, which is really weird. He has a very optimistic and positive ending to all of his novels, even though they deal with some really, really dark and violent and, very adult topics. But everybody seems to, the right people always come out on top at the end, which I suppose is, your prerogative as a writer. But he, like we were talking about with George, William Gibson was the creator, pretty much out of whole cloth, of an entire new way of doing science fiction. He grew up in the era of, rocket ships and, that shiny 50s, version of sci-fi where everything, all the stuff that George Lucas also rebelled against, but, all everything was shiny and clean and ordered, and, and we all had crinkly, foil suits, and we all went out into space with our big glass helmets, and we're like, hey, let's fight those aliens. And
it's like Robbie the Robot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And he went through, being a member of the counterculture in the 60s and being in college at the time, and, during all that, he very much took those sensibilities like Lucas did, and injected them into his art. And it is almost interesting to juxtapose him with George Lucas, but, Lucas was trying to reach back for something that was more positive and more like, remember the good old days before the Vietnam War kind of a thing. And Gibson was more like charging towards the fail. He was like, how bad is it going to get? And he wrote a bunch of short stories that are all very different. One of them became sort of a rehearsal for the book Neuromancer, and unfortunately, most people, their only real interaction with William Gibson is the movie adaptation of the short story Johnny Mnemonic, and that is a shitty movie. I'm sorry, but
I enjoyed it at the time. But I see where you're coming from, because of it betrays a lot of the best ideas in his work,
right?
For cheap thrills and petty entertainments or whatever.
Well, yeah, and the thing about the short story of Johnny Mnemonic is it's almost literally a one-act play where everything takes place in a bar. And it starts off with a Mexican standoff where you got like three people pointing guns at each other, and they all want to kill each other, and nobody's wanting to put the gun down first, kind of a thing. And it's all about, him transferring data in his brain. And anyway, that's probably about the only part.
He never threatens, I can crash your whole board from here, man.
Yeah, he doesn't.
Don't do it, Johnny.
Johnny.
Don't, Johnny, no.
Yeah, the character Johnny Mnemonic in the book is not Neo or Johnny Utah or any of those people that Keanu Reeves plays in all of his films. No, it's a much more compact and paranoid story. But anyway, yeah, it's unfortunate that was that's how most people know William Gibson, and then there's the other people who, like we had talked about before, that know him as the failed playwright of the third Alien installment. Yeah. And and he actually wrote several. Also, to touch on a previous topic, he also wrote a couple of really good episodes of the X-Files. But he and again, it's he's very much, he has a conceit about cyberspace and virtual things and what they can do. And his first trilogy of novels, which was Neuromancer, Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive, are all set in, it's called the Sprawl series, which is based on, there's a geographical the reference they call the Sprawl, which is basically one big city that covers the entire east coast of the United States. That basically all the major metropolitan areas have grown together into one massive city that stretches from like Canada down to Florida. And so they all take place in that universe. And then he has a second series of novels that are totally different. It's called the Bridge series, and they take place on the West Coast and mostly around San Francisco. But his books are very prescient in a lot of ways, and it's also very interesting because as he progressed as a writer, his stories started to take place closer and closer in the future. You know, like his first books were like, 150 years in the future when everything's shit. And he's even admitted, because I was just writing, stories about today, but I was, gussing it up as sci-fi because, people, it's kind of like the old Star Trek show. We were writing about current issues, but we put it in space and made the ladies green, so you didn't think we were actually doing social commentary, right? And that's kind of a lot of what he writes about. But he deals with a lot of very, kind of real world things, especially as he starts to get closer and closer. Because like the first series is about the fear of the power of artificial intelligence. Really is what it comes down to, and it's a trilogy based on the first story is there's two AIs that are kind of at war with each other, and the one is trying to merge with the other in order to form a larger consciousness. And it all, spoiler alert, everybody, sorry, but so the whole thing in the novel is that Case and his crew are working for one of the AIs, and then the other AI is trying to stop them from whatever they're doing. And then the whole goal is to try and merge these things into this new, entity. And so in the second novel, the new entity exists out there in cyberspace, but it has taken on, it's so big and powerful that it has to have multiple personalities. And so it manifests itself as voodoo gods, and this is kind of like Neil Gaiman probably ripped all this off.
I was going to
for
say,
American
I was
gods,
thinking Neil Gaiman when you said that.
Well, yeah, and that book came way after, just so everybody knows. But it's another interesting manifestation about, there's conversations about like the technology of arcologies and, the cyber networks, and then the power of corporations and the power of corporate, corporate knowledge is the ultimate currency, things of that nature. And I mean, that book starts with these guys, mercenaries, are hired to stage a defection of a scientist from one company to another, because in these novels, he kind of takes on the old Japanese corporate model from the 80s and more like the American, corporate model from the 1880s of the company rules your life. You live in the company house, you shop at the company store, you sing the company songs, you go work, and you never leave the company,
Right.
Your kids go to the company school, and ultimately they wind up working for the company. It's like a generational workforce thing. And so in his novels, he takes that to this, futuristic logical conclusion where corporations are bigger than countries, and it's almost like Cold War spy defection shit. Like, these are the guys that are working in this company's AI, lab, and they're advancing on us, and we need to, keep up and compete with them in the marketplace. So we're going to steal their top dude. And they send in like armed people to get these guys out of the company. It is a very interesting and kind of fun, concept. But that's how this particular book starts. And there's a thing about, again, the AIs are helping people and inserting themselves into the world. And the main character in this novel is a different guy. He's one of these corporate defector specialist guys. He's a mercenary or whatever. Carries forward. There's a few of the characters that pass through, and this is another great thing about Gibson is he writes sequels to his work, but he doesn't write pure sequels. Like, it carries on in the same universe. They reference events in the previous novel, but it's all looked at through the eyes of a different set of characters. And so sometimes a character from the previous book will show up. So there's a character named Molly who is in Neuromancer, and she's an integral part of that book. She's mentioned in passing in the second book, and then she's the main character in the third book. And then there's another guy named Rats who's a minor character, but he is a person in the first book, and then he's referenced in the second book, he helps the guy out with some stuff. And then in the third book, his consciousness is transferred into a machine. And so he's kind of like this construct of, he's I don't even call him a cyborg, but anyway. And then there's a whole thing about that too. Personality constructs is a big thing and again, he draws from all these influences in science and culture. Like the personality construct thing is like one of these deals where people in science fiction for numerous decades have fantasized about, are you able to transfer your consciousness into a machine and live forever?
I've seen every terrible movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But it's a thing that we've also, like, through the study of artificial intelligence and actual computer science, there's been progress made in mapping the synapses of a human brain and creating an electrical network that would mirror that. And then the question that comes from that, of course, is back to the science fiction one. Well, if we can physically recreate the electrical network that is a human brain, can we transfer those electrical impulses that are our personality and our lives and our memories into that mechanical brain? And again, what has become was science fantasy or science fiction is now science possibility, if not science fact. And so, again, this is why Gibson keeps continuing to be labeled this sage and this prophet of the future, because he came up with the whole debit card idea in Neuromancer, right? 1984. He talks about cyberspace, virtual reality, all those things. 1984, the personal computer hadn't even really happened yet, Microprocessors hadn't happened yet. I mean, people were still, doing tape data, and, big corporate computers were still vacuum tube computers. And here he is talking about basically the internet and, a decade and a half before the earliest version was available to the public. And, and all these things. But as his books become closer and closer to current times, again, he still is predicting way into the future. So in the second round of books, which is the Bridge trilogy, which is basically that there was a big earthquake in San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge is no longer used as a bridge. So a bunch of squatters went and took it, and they're all living out there. And they've built like a community on the bridge or whatever.
So like real San Francisco now?
Yeah, well, kind of, yeah. Well, it's again, it feels very Escape from New York-y. It feels like, all these things that, of course, tropey or whatever. But, I mean, again, these books were coming out in the early 90s at that point, because I think Virtual Light, which was the first one of those, came out like 91 or 92. Anyway, so, it draws from some of that. But, again, he's talking about there's a meditation in this cycle of novels about technology fandoms. And he also talks about 3D printing before 3D printing was a thing. So like there's this whole, in the second novel, Idoru, he talks about there's a virtual pop star. It's basically, it's a computer, it's a hologram, right? And everybody's like, it's a lady, she's like a Japanese singer or whatever, but she's like global icon pop star, but she's a hologram, right? So she's a series of computers and projectors and all this stuff, but she's a program that is basically an AI. It's kind of alive, but it can't truly physically exist without these hologram projectors. And then there's this other guy who he's like a big time pop star. He's like Michael Jackson or whatever. He's like this massively globally popular guy, and he's announced that he's going to marry the hologram, right? And so it's like this power couple. And again, these are things like things that we see now quite regularly on the the newsstand or at least at the end of the checkout aisle at the grocery store. The Brangelina power couple or whatever, right? Like that kind of stuff. And again, he's taking these things, but he's taking them to like the most absurd conclusion possible. Like, when entertainment is completely virtual, like, will we still care that virtual stars are having breakups and like, like all that kind of stuff? And anyway, it's fascinating, again, a fascinating subplot. But at the end, there's a company that they've basically developed this technology that is kind of like the replicator in Star Trek. Like you put a bunch of money in the machine and it vends whatever, but within reason. But so the whole thing is that these they're basically convenience stores. They're kind of like little Circle K's in a box. They get dropped all over the place. Like pop-up convenience stores, but they have these printer things or whatever, these dispensers. Well, at the end of the book, they wind up downloading the virtual star lady into the network, and she winds up coming out of all these machines. So there's like thousands of her walking around now, kind of at the end of the book, and it's just like, what the hell just happened? Kind of a deal. Anyway, again, and I'm not doing justice to these stories, but there's, again, he just talks about all of this stuff, and he does it in a very succinct but vivid way, and it's all, I would say, believable, but it's his books, they suck you in, and they're quickish reads, but there's no big hurdle you have to get over in terms of being overly wordy like a Stephen King novel, or being so incredibly technically overwrought that you need to go do a bunch of studying to understand
that's what I've always been. And you had mentioned before about kind of, there was these early cyberpunk. Is Neil Stephenson within that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he's a guy that it's like, I've never been able to really penetrate his prose, where it's like, there's so much backstory. I just get like, oh, I can't do
That's
this.
true. And there's a lot of, and here's the great thing is that there's a lot of those authors. Yes, they're assuming a high level of technical expertise on the part of the reader. Gibson, he's very subtle about how he explains himself to you. He starts off with, this is the world of my novel. These are my characters, right? And there's no introduction. There's no crawl. It's no, there's no like any kind of primer to prepare you for what's happening. But you have to, he wants you to trust him, and he does a great job of this, that you may feel a little, off kilter or not quite fully aware when you start off, but as the novel progresses, things happen, conversations are had, memories are referenced, and it all starts to make sense. And part of it is he wants you to have that mystery, because if he tells it all to you up front, then the story is not going to be worth it. But it assumes a level of intelligence on the part of the reader that, I don't have to talk down to you and explain all this shit, but it also doesn't talk down to you in the sense that I'm going to be so overly technical about all this science fiction that you're just going to have to go read an encyclopedia and, later. But one of the great things about his books is that there's enough inside baseball there where if you are a tech person, or if you are someone who is very well versed in the computer industry and all of that, you'll get the fun stuff that he throws in. Like, for example, in Neuromancer, there is a governing body law enforcement agency that deals with rogue artificial intelligences, and they're called the Turing Authority, named after Alan Turing, who was one of the first,
right, the Turing test, or
yeah,
the AI Turing test,
yeah. And so stuff like that, and things that that just are casually mentioned in the novels that seem appropriate. You're like, oh, it's an authority, it's a government agency, it's called the Turing, whatever. Like, but then you read, or if you come across something later on, you're like, oh, that guy. Oh, the guy who developed the AI test, or developed, the concept of artificial intelligence, whatever. And it becomes kind of a multi-layered kind of thing at that point, where you start to go, oh, okay. And like, for example, there's a space station that is in Neuromancer, and it's one of those conical circular ones where because of the rotation, it creates gravity. I mean, that's all very grounded in science. But the main avenue is the Rue Jules Verne, stuff like that. Like it's kind of a fun throwback where he references prior science and prior science fiction. But these stories again, and then his last trilogy, that was completed. It was in current times, and it's all post 9/11, and it's about governments and crime and things of that nature that still deal with technology, but again, it's very much about capturing kind of what's going on culturally at the time. And he talks a lot about he talks about like viral marketing and guerrilla marketing. He talks a lot about fashion and the fashion industry, which sounds like a weird thing to put in a futurist novel, but it's like there's this whole thing where there's a guy who's making clothes, and they're based on some military pattern that wasn't supposed to be made available to the public. And so there's like this whole thing, like somebody's again selling information and whatever, and this guy's like killing it on the fashion market because he's selling like experimental special forces parachute pants or whatever. Like it's again not doing justice to it here.
It's so funny because I just saw this whole video about this material made off of silicone or something like that, and they make this weird fiber, and everybody thought it was gonna. It's like they can only make flecks of it, and they thought, oh, it's conductive and it's super strong. We're gonna have, everybody's gonna be like have like a power suit, and really all they do is they kind of put it. It's like you might be able to control your phone from your sleeve at some point. That's what at some point it was like they thought this is bleeding edge tech. We'll be able to make computers that are like flimsy and you can snap to rigid, but really like, no, we're going to be able, you can change the volume of your phone on your wrist basically.
But still, it's an interesting thing because Gibson, he's wound his passions and his hobbies into his novels, and especially more as he gets on. But he was very fascinated by fashion and what becomes popular in fashion and why do certain things catch on culturally, and the whole thing is most men's fashion over the last half century has developed out of military clothing. And, whether it be cargo pants, whether it be, flight jackets, I mean, all these things, different materials, khaki, stuff like that. All these things have developed out of military, like ripstop, which is, my shorts I'm wearing right now.
Shirts.
Yeah, Hawaiian shirts.
Come on, think about it.
Yeah.
Pierce. What's his name from MASH?
That's true. Well, the hula shirt actually, made a huge.
I guess that is
was imported into the continental United States.
I was making a joke, and I realized that I'm actually it would be like all the post-war guys coming back with stuff they bought in the Philippines and Hawaii. And
So again, so it's this thing that he follows and he writes about and in his nonfiction work, and it gets incorporated into these plot lines of his other stuff. And there's these characters. This guy. Hubertus Bijend, who is a character that shows up in all three of those books. Zero history, pattern recognition, zero history, and pattern recognition, spook country, zero history. Those are the three books. He's this guy who runs this marketing agency called Blue Ant, and he's this.
I've heard of that. Oh, there actually is never mind. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking there actually is a company called Blue Ant. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Well, and so the story is like he's this guy he's the ultimate like cool hunter buzz guy, right? He makes a career of being in front of every single trend or thing that interests him. And so he's kind of trying to take these things and then package them and market the shit out of them and get rich off of them. And so he hires people to work for him who are kind of savanty in their various, pursuits. And it's funny, if you look at the way his name is spelled in the book, it's spelled Big End. but he's Bijan, you know, and it's kind of one of those things. It's all a big joke. Everybody in the book refers to him as Big End, but when he introduces himself, it's Bijan, you know, like all of a sudden they're like, yeah, right, you know, and anyway, it's again the characters are fantastic, but this guy, there's a whole thing about the pattern recognition is a book about film and the internet, and there's this club or culture or fandom of this unknown filmmaker who releases like 40-second or 2-minute clips of film on the internet, and nobody knows who's making it, where it comes from, you know, why it's out there, if it's being released in order or out of order. Nobody can tell who the actors are in it. It's black and white, and like everybody, like all this stuff. And so there's this community online built around fandom of this film, this found footage or whatever it is, you know, and all the conspiracy theories and all the speculation. Again, all the stuff that we're engaged in now about like Star Wars,
right?
You know, like they released a still photo of the set of Solo. Is that Boba Fett? Oh my God, you know, and then like all the people come into the forum and they all have their competing theories. And he takes all that, and again, that book came out, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And again, he is just a step or two as an author ahead of what is now totally normal and expected in our culture, you know, and it's almost in a way the character of Bijan is sort of a large, rich, bombastic version of Gibson himself. He's kind of the guy who's out there kind of seeing the way and then bringing it back to society and going, hey, this is the next big thing. And everybody's like, holy shit, that is the next big thing. And so he started to write more books about current events or slightly in the future, like next week, you know, not like 100 and whatever years in the future. And it was interesting because it's still classified as science fiction, even though if you picked up that third trilogy and read it and you didn't know anything about William Gibson or who he was, you would think it would just be a modern fiction, like mystery novels or whatever, like people trying to solve a problem, run around, driving around in cars, you know, using cell phones. There's no weird, you know, artificial intelligence is controlling the universe or any of that stuff. And so there was a little bit of controversy about it. And even Gibson said, you know, the best you could call what I'm writing right now is speculative fiction, but it's still just regular fiction, right? He's like, I'm not really writing science fiction anymore because he has some level of embarrassment about his earlier writing, because things that he thought were really edgy and cool in his books are completely fall flat in today's society. Like there's a scene that is actually really quite cool in Neuromancer where Case, the main character, he's in an airport and he's walking through a terminal, and the large bank of payphones, right, which clearly is a dead thing now. Like you try and find a payphone, right? You know, but as the character walks by, each phone rings once as he walks by, as he goes down the line, right? Because earlier he takes his call and it's from the AI and he's like, oh, F you, and he hangs up and then he walks away and the phones all ring as he walks by. And it's kind of this cool, creepy thing, like I'm watching you, like whatever. But even he says, any kid born after, you know, like 1990 picks this book up and goes, what's a payphone? Right? You know? And he goes, I won all these awards and everybody thinks I know the future. He goes, why does nobody in this book have a cell phone? Right? And it's kind of cool, like, to see him be humble about that. But at the same time, I think he's being overly self-effacing. But I mean, you can't be, you know, 100% in your predictions. But.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was, as you were listing off these concepts, I'm like, and I have a question. So it's, you know, I see it in Neil Blomkamp's movie Elysium, stuff that I've kind of reminds me of Gibson. There was this really bad Johnny Depp movie called Transcendence that kind of pilfers a lot of this, you know, transferring yourself to AI. And then back in the day, there was, you know, Free Jack and
Free Jack.
And then of course Selfless, this just came out last year, which is a really terrible movie with Ben Kingsley and Ryan Reynolds, where Ben Kingsley's psyche gets dumped into Ryan Reynolds' body or something.
Oh,
like
yeah.
So my point is that aside from Johnny Mnemonic and, an aborted Alien 3 screenplay, there hasn't, they tried to do some kind of weird multi technological, like, it had a soundtrack and some CD-ROM for Neuromancer, I think.
Neuromancer, the game, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Computer game.
There isn't really, as much as that he's had his ideas pilfered from stuff, there's never really been a lot of his works made into movies.
No, there's only one other pure, it's actually the most pure adaptation of his writing is made into a film. It's called New Rose Hotel. And it's got
I've heard of that.
Willem Dafoe. And it was an independent film.
Yeah, it's Abel Ferrara that did like the Driller Killer and
yeah, and it's based again on one of the short stories. So Johnny Mnemonic, Nero's Hotel, they all appear in a collection of his short works called Burning Chrome, and it's a futuristic story, but it's basically a story of betrayal, love and betrayal, really. But it's kind of got a techno, logical kind of edge to it or whatever, and sort of future-y and whatever. But it's basically Willem Dafoe is one of these, data hustlers, and he's,
Doesn't it take place all in like one room though?
Well, it all takes place in one building, in the New Rose Hotel. Yeah.
Okay,
and so it's all filmed in the hotel where it was filmed, I think, is in Tokyo, and I thought it was actually quite well done. I don't know if anybody's going to get an Oscar or whatever, but I mean, of course, it's a 20-year-old movie now. Yeah. But point is, like, it's probably the most faithful adaptation of his works onto film. He has been trying to get Neuromancer made into a film forever, and I think Johnny Mnemonic killed the idea of any of his works ever, because people look at the finished product of Johnny Mnemonic, which is absolute shit and has nothing to do with anything. I mean, when you've got you
got Ice-T.
Ice-T.
The kangaroo and a talking dolphin.
Yeah, well, the talking dolphin is actually from the story.
Okay.
But it's not actually talking. But there's a whole thing that's in one of the books. Or I think it's in the short story, the fact that it's a formerly heroin-addicted dolphin that was used in military experiments or whatever, and now it just hangs out in a tank at some bar. Anyway, yeah. And they took that concept and turned it into something completely different in the movie. Then what else? Oh my God, He-Man, Rocky IV, Dolph Lundgren. Yeah, Dolph Lundgren's in it, and then Henry Rollins.
Yeah,
and all those people. I mean, it was one of those '90s sort of self-masturbatory kind of like, let's just get all the names and throw it in there and we'll do all this stupid shit. And it was made in Canada.
I think there was some joke about, well, it wasn't a joke in the movie, but like, I'm going to get my brain, upgraded. I can have almost 10 gigs of information.
Right.
That's the worst part is like, and that's not his call, but like, getting down to brass tacks with numbers and like speculation, the storage.
And the fact that every screen in that movie is an actual CRT television.
Right.
There's not even like, hey, let's spend a little extra money on some special effects and make a flat screen or something. Like there's a lot of really bad choices like that. And
yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's like almost like cyberpunk was building up to you thought like there was Johnny Mnemonic. Remember Tank Girl?
Well, Tank Girl, was based on a comic.
Yeah, which was kind of a cyberpunky type thing.
Yep.
But then like people had even though I don't really think his stuff definitely influenced guys like Gibson, like Philip K. Dick. Yes. People started coming into, he wasn't necessarily as prescient about technology, but more of a kind of societal kind of, how people interact. And, he had kind of he was very heavily into talking about like what drugs would, well, I guess Gibson talked a bit about that too, about what part drugs would play in our future
Yes.
life about this. I guess the thing is, don't they have to? He has to take some drug, or he has a liver in cyber, where it won't process the drug he likes, or something like that.
They do a whole thing where they give him like a new pancreas and a new liver, and the whole deal is that they need him sober for this job, and because he's such a degenerate, they're like, we know we can't keep him away from the drugs, so we're going to keep the drugs away from him. And so they hotwire his body for it to basically not get him high. So he tries to take the drugs and do the drugs, and he's like, nothing's happening. And they're like, yeah, well, we fixed you. Not only did we fix you and make you able to perform the task that we're hiring you for, but we also fixed you so that when we need you to perform the task, you're not going to be strung out or hungover or, otherwise passed out in an alley somewhere puking on yourself.
Yeah, and that's why I was thinking about that Neil Blomkamp movie Elysium, where they basically later in the movie, Matt Damon's character becomes kind of like a physical key to get into this Elysium, and then they put these huge, like, ridiculous bolts in him, and he's got a computer in the back of his head because he's dying of radiation poisoning. So he's like, I don't care. Put it in me.
Yeah.
Because if you get up to Elysium, they can just fix you with a machine. So to him, it was just like the risk.
Got to get in.
The risk's worth the reward. But it's like, a lot of these concepts, it's like, I just don't understand why he doesn't get more work coming up with this. Because even to my earlier point, it felt like cyberpunk was kind of building, and then all of a sudden, the internet blew up, and it's almost like people kind of stopped thinking about the internet in its, I stopped thinking about the future, really.
Yeah.
It's like there seems to be a lot of, although I do think it's kind of coming back. It's, one of the big games that's kind of on the horizon. They don't even know when it's coming out is, unfortunately, it's not a great title, but it's called Cyberpunk 2077. It's this Polish, I think it's Polish company that they made the Witcher 3 game, which people...
Right. They were just talking about that at
E3. It was a big thing, and they showed a little bit of it, and it
looks really good.
It's definitely kind of like one of those things where people are like, robots and their arms spread out to 3, everybody looks like General Grievous or something, and it's like, I'm a robo prostitute, and it's like, even he's been so influential. It's just amazing that none of his pure stories have ever gotten to.
Well, yeah, that's the thing that one of the reasons why I feel like I should be talking about this guy is that he's the grandfather of pretty much everything that we now seem to take for granted in a lot of our science fiction. The entire Matrix movie series rips off pretty much everything that he's ever thought about or written about. And it was unfortunate. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do, especially the first one. I enjoy the Matrix movies a lot. The first one was amazing. But I feel like that success and that thing that the Matrix was, and just the global phenomena that it kicked off, and the refocusing of science fiction and into more of this darker noir techno thing, that really belongs to Gibson. He's the guy that wrote all this shit for decades before that movie got made, and the fact that they even took the name The Matrix from his book, and that they stood upon the shoulders of giants and then didn't give them credit, and that's kind of the tragedy of the whole Matrix, experience. But, there's sort of been a renaissance in a way for Gibson. It's kind of weird. Like, he went through a period where pure book sci-fi nerds in the 80s he won all the awards, he made all the money, sold all the books. And then in the 90s, he kind of started to drop off. But then the X-Files brought him in, and he wrote a couple episodes, and he got big again. And I think that's when, at or around the same time as the Johnny Mnemonic movie, the Johnny Mnemonic movie might have been a little before that.
Yeah, I think that was kind of early, mid-90s.
Yeah, but then his books got popular again. And then he started on this weird post-9/11 thing. And he's actually really, again, this is something that showed up in his books. he's gotten into film, and I think it's his daughter is an amateur film person. I mean, she's, I want to say maybe college age now, but she's been part of doing like experimental cinema and stuff like that. And he's written a lot in his nonfiction writing about how, he shamelessly kind of follows her around because the kids and what they're doing and how they approach technology and how they adapt technology to their own purposes, and how things that he wouldn't have thought of doing with technology, kids are doing. And so these are things that are informing his work. And like his most recent trilogy, so The Peripheral was the last book he published, and the second book in that series is coming out this fall or early spring, and I don't know what the title of that book is. But The Peripheral is, again, it's in the future again, but a lot of the conversation in that book revolves around 3D printing. And it's funny because, now here we are, in current 2018, there's this sudden, national conversation going on about the 3D printing of guns. And the 3D printing mechanism in this book, which came out, I think, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, maybe. Anyway, it's like, it's one of these things, it's ubiquitous in society. Again, you go down to the convenience store, you get a hot dog, and then somebody 3D prints you a cell phone, and this kind of thing about the rules and the prohibitions on the 3D printers. And that, and again, there's the conversations going on right now in real time is not entirely, not entirely well informed about what 3D printing is and the different tiers and types of 3D printing and what it costs and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that you can do it with metal, but you can also do it. Everybody that we know does it with plastic at home, and they make, accessories for their 501st outfits. But in his future, he's talking like people are 3D printing drugs and 3D printing guns, and like it's kind of this sort of lawless element. And so you have like outlaw 3D printers, and you got, and again, that's not, it's a subtext of the story. It's an important element, but it's not what the story is all about. But it does kind of give you, again, this interesting meditation on, the gray market and technology, and how every new technology adapts itself to crime, as well as whatever its intended purpose was, and all those things. And it's fascinating. But yeah, the Neuromancer was supposed to be adapted to a comic book, and the first half of the graphic novel was published, and the second half never came out.
Weird.
And that was in the late 80s. He did write a comic book for IDW. It was a 5-issue or a 6-issue story. It was called Archangel, and they just put it out in trade paperback recently. And that was an interesting story. It's kind of a time travel, go back in time, change future events kind of a deal, but it has to do with the president is kind of like, and again, you kind of know where his politics are when you start to read some of these things. But yeah, the president has fashioned himself as a dictator for life. And so somebody's trying to go back in time to kill his parents, so he can't be born, so he can't become the dictator, and all the kerfluffles that happen in that. And it's all based around World War II. So you go back in time to World War II, and there's all stuff. Anyway, it was a good story. Again, it felt very noir-y, even though there was a sci-fi element of time travel into it. He's very ubiquitous in a way, because he's also, a lot of his nonfiction writing is very interesting and meditative and prescient, because he talks about just different cultural things that are going on. He talks about, about Japanese culture a lot, because he's always been fascinated with Japan. And he talks about, like, for example, the otaku culture, where it's like people who become obsessed about one small little thing and then like create it and recreate it. And like, apparently there's a thing that people make these balls of mud that are so perfectly round and smooth that scientists, when they see them, say there's no way this could be made by human hands, but they are, because they're so precise and perfect and smooth. And it's like this whole thing, like he writes about these things and just kind of like talking.
So this is
in his nonfiction writing.
Okay, so this is real.
So this is real stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's like, and he talks about like there's a store in Japan that is dedicated entirely to people who build, working replicas of 18th century steam engines. And so you go get your parts, and for any size.
Wow.
From like, 1/16 to 1:1 scale. Like anyway, but he talks about that kind of stuff, and he talks about filmmaking, and he's a prolific collector of watches, which again is a hilarious thing, because here's this futurist guy who's like Mr. Internet and Mr. but he likes mechanical watches.
And he a thing that almost nobody has anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no kid does.
Right. And so he wrote a great article about eBay early on in the beginning of eBay, and he talks about the addictive qualities of online auctions and all those things, and he talks about collecting watches and how collecting creates expertise, which creates obsession, which creates like all these problems, and he has this whole thing about the bots, the bidding bots, and all this stuff. And, but he goes through this whole. But it's great. But the entire article is written around this one auction for this like '60s vintage Rolex that he wanted, and he touches on all of the problems, the societal problems that eBay causes when it comes to the obsessive nature of the bidding, the out of control. Once you get into that fight with that person or that robot or whatever, whoever's bidding, to be the winner, and then you forget that you paid twice as much as you should have for that thing, right, because you're more obsessed with winning. Yeah. It's just a great thing. And he's, as his career has progressed, he's spent a lot of time really observing humanity and then translating that into his novels. And he still kind of has a little bit of that. Oh, I saw a thing the other day. What's the farthest and most worst place we can take that? Like 3D printing, right? Like, oh, hey, we've discovered this new technology. We can create things in real life out of plastic with this extruder. And he's like, what the kids are going to do with that? They're going to make drugs. And you're like, I didn't even think of that, but he can go there,
yeah.
And then he writes that novel, and then everybody buys it. And we're like, "Wow, this sci-fi shit is crazy." And then 6 years later, some kid in Arkansas busted for printing drugs. And you're like,
well, I mean,
it's
like, well, it's like the what's the apparently now I'm gonna really sound like an old guy, but apparently there's people that they vape this nicotine or flavors or whatever, and now I don't know if this is a brand or a style, so I apologize. But they call it the kids. They don't call it a vaping. They call it a jewel. It's like a JUUL. It's like a brand.
Okay.
And I don't know if these might be two separate issues. So I apologize to teachers out there. They're probably screaming at me because they know about it more than I do. That there's some way that kids can actually they've done that because they've taken the idea of like when we were in school. This isn't something I ever did. I waited till I was actually a voting age adult before I made the mistake of smoking. But kids, they've circumvented smoking because nobody smokes. That's disgusting. And now they vape because it's discreet. But now they've gone, well, that's not enough. They found a way to discharge their jewel all in like one hit. So they can get all that nicotine in like one shot. And then they literally get like high from it. Now, I don't know if it's the jewel thing, but it's something to do. I was reading about this. But it's that thing where it's like kids constantly, it's like it's like if you want to think about it metaphorically, it's like kids, they're not just kids, they're literally like Whitney Houston says, the future. Mm-hmm. And it's like the future is constantly grabbing the present and like manipulating it to its end. Because I got a nice opportunity I went down to my hometown last weekend where they did this, speaking of nostalgia, that was an all-class high school reunion.
Oh, okay.
So I thought, it'll be fun because see people maybe weren't in my class. Well, my wife and I were probably, well, the irony is we saw two or three people we went to high school with, but we didn't know them well enough to say hi. That's an indication of my high school. But my point is I got to tour the new high school because some kids burned my high school down. So there's only one building, which is the gym remaining of my high school, because two idiot kids thought that they could burn down the school and hide their permanent record, which was actually stored in the other building next door. So eventually they had to tear.
Sorry.
No, it's it's the same. It's
Fight Club.
It's the high school that I went to, my wife went to, Kurt Cobain went to, Dale Crover of the Melvins went to, famous artists. I can't remember the guy's name. There's a Nobel Prize winner for physics that went there. So
wow.
It's historic. I went there. It's historically significant. But they had to tear it all down, and they built this beautiful new school. And now, as I'm saying this, I'm starting to remember my point. So anyway, we're going through all this stuff, and it's amazing. Like comparative to like I went to my high school from 87 to 91. So take from that what technology was like. And I think about like what my dreams were and how much of that how much of that would have been great if I'd had access to technology. And that seems to be the great democratizer, or supposedly supposed to be. We had signed up for a piano class, canceled every year because they didn't have the pianos and they didn't want to buy them. They have piano rooms now. Nobody takes piano.
Right.
They have a full thing with a beautiful Gretsch drum set, bass amps. You could percussion instruments up the wazoo. You could do an album at this high school. There's like 7 kids in the choir. It's this weird thing where it's like they're already onto something else. It's like the grown-ups try to predict maybe the kids would like to have their own radio station. There's a low-powered FM station. Kids don't listen to the radio. It's like this thing. Yeah. And
what you need a computer room with a bunch of servers and a good connection so you can run an internet radio station or podcasting or whatever, and then make your synth music and upload it.
They're just a little bit behind the times. And this old dude was kind of lamenting because we're walking through the design. They have sign shops. They have, I'm just like shocked. Because it's like, I even said to the vice principal, because she was our tour guide, it's like, you got any room for a 45-year-old freshman?
Yeah.
But, this guy, older dude, goes, so all the kids have access to the internet? Like, yeah. I heard up in Seattle, they look at pornography on the internet at the library, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Like, it's just, because it's a public library.
Yeah, and I was like, well, do they filter the internet here at this school? And it's just like, well, it's filtered. But,
yes, this is North Korea High.
But she admitted that she's like, but it's grown-ups that filter it, and it's probably kids they know how to get around it.
And they're probably doing that at home anyway.
Yeah, and it's like that thing I kind of said. I said the kids today will be writing the algorithms that block the internet for the next generation. It's like, I don't know what my point is, but it is this kind of thing where it's like technology has been, technology was I felt like when I was growing up, like that was a thing. Like when you said like, oh, I'm into technology, the people kind of knew what that meant.
Right.
Usually it was computers, and it's so integrated into our lives now that I wonder about, how kids will be like, I'm not saying, kids they're not going to understand how good they got it, but it's more like they're really good at working inside the box and taking the box and twisting it to what they need. But I always wonder, it's like the kids I talk to, they don't really seem to be interested in ever making a new box that somebody down the road will manipulate. It's like the thing that they're very... And maybe like I said, I don't have kids, so I'm completely way off base here. But it's just like they're perfectly happy somebody else making the thing that they hack and manipulate to their own ends. But as interesting as that can be, it does make you wonder. It's like, what happens when nobody knows how to make those boxes anymore, and you've hacked it to death? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a function. Maybe hacking it is repurposing it, and therefore that's your new box or whatever. But
no, it's true. And this goes to the larger conversation about the ubiquity of technology, and the taking it for granted produces a society that is not fully versed in how it works, because it's always been there.
Right.
previous generations, as they witnessed the birth of different types of technology, they also understood how it worked. So when it broke, they could fix it. And one of the problems is that, technology is so advanced and so small and so integrated into everything that even when it does break, we really honestly don't know how to fix it. And so even though, like you say, people are manipulating, hacking, or otherwise writing code or writing programs to work on some of this stuff, there's not a lot of real understanding of the underlying principles,
And that also might have, to be perfectly honest, it might have something to do with our generation about the way that we handle these things, and also the certain sense of disposability with technology, and the fact that, we went from being like, can you imagine how quickly these phones upgraded, to the fact that, if something goes wrong around our house, we're more apt to be like, I'm just going to throw it out and get a new one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if my powered speaker battery doesn't hold a charge, I throw it in the trash and I go buy a new one. I don't go on to Instructables or whatever and learn how to pry open the thing and replace order a light ion battery from Amazon and solder on a new connection. I went through years where I was like, it's broken, throw it out. I don't think all my old cell phones would just be like, I'd wipe them and they would go in the trash or something, like take the battery out, dispose the battery, throw the tech out. But yeah, now it's like when my dad's generation and your dad's generation or whatever, it's like there was always the possibility, and maybe this is actually more of like, I would say the uncle's generation of like the Heath kit. Of like, because I remember when I was a kid, I was like, I want a TV, and my dad would be like, we'll go down to Heathkit and we'll build one.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, you were building the Radio Shack. Man, we had talked about that. Remember when on our Toys R Us one, where you could go to Radio Shack and you get a kit, build yourself your own radio. Like you could actually build an AM FM tuner, and it would hook up to a speaker, and you could create a little radio for yourself. And like, nobody does that shit anymore.
You understand the principle of it, and I understand that the idea of something simple of a radio. But then again, radio waves is what feeds your Wi-Fi, and it feeds the Bluetooth, that feeds your controllers of your Xbox. But that being said, there are always kids that'll go like, oh, they can hack their Xbox and figure out how to play ROMs or whatever. There's always the smart kid that knows how to do the technology, and it also has something to do with like the corporate mentality of like the things that we allow corporations to get away with by continuing to purchase their products long after they've become hostile to the people that buy them. Like I'm actually specifically thinking of Apple. Since they just hit the $1 trillion valuation, I'm gonna pick on them, and they've got shitloads of my money. And it's like, I'm in the architecture, which in some ways makes, on one level you think, oh, I'm staying hip. And it's like, no, you're actually thinking about it in almost not like William Gibson, but you're thinking about someone, it's like you're thinking about your Neuromancer, Blade Runner kind of attitude, and you're like, well, how do I stay with it? Oh, I'll just now my phone works with my iPad, which works with my laptop, which works with my streaming device. And it's like a real smart kid would be like, oh, I can just do that with anything. And I do it with this, there's a phone apparently, and I'm blanking on the name. No, Huawei or something. I don't know the proper pronunciation. There's this Chinese company that makes this incredible phone that would just wipe the floor with Samsung and Apple if they could just get it on the shores. But there's this kind of idea of like, well, this company might have a little bit too cushy with the state government, and the way do we know what sub commands?
I'm dealing with that with my ZTE phone right now.
Yeah, and it's that kind of thing where you're constantly like, maybe these things would be a little bit better if we weren't holding it back in some ways. It's like,
well, and this kind of circles back into sort of some of the themes of the novels is, technology run amok is a problem. Technology repressed is a problem too.
Yeah.
And And so finding that balance, like you talk about, but I still think that that a level of, and I'm totally guilty of this, but I still think a level of understanding is entirely necessary. You know, it's like, it reminds me when I was a young man and I had dreams of another life. I went to college to study architecture, and the first semester in school in the architecture program, we sat and we hand wrote alphabets on vellum for 12 weeks or whatever. Wow. And just over and over and over again. You had to turn in so many alphabets a week. Alphabets, capital, lowercase, numbers. And then we would draw squares freehand. And we would do math longhand. And, and this is 93, right? 94. Computers are around. There's CAD. There's these things, these programs that are available. And the students used to bitch and bitch and bitch about, why are we doing this by hand? Why are we doing this by hand? And looking back on it, part of it was kind of like that Navy SEAL thing where it's like all the non-hackers can go ring the bell and go home kind of a deal. And it was a way of weeding out the people who weren't serious about the program. But on the other hand, one of my professors made a really great point. And he said, because when the world ends, right, and the apocalypse comes, he goes, and there is no electricity and there is no computers. He goes, somebody's going to have to rebuild the world. And he goes, and if you understand how to do this stuff in your head or write it down on paper and do the long form, he goes, you can pick up a burnt stick. He goes, and you can show the world how to recover. He goes, yeah, the computers are great. But when you have to get good at this shit in your head, and you have to get good at it using your hands first. Because when it all goes down, that's all you're going to have left. And it was like, wow. That's a pretty powerful message, I mean, yeah, he was probably being a little over the top and using a bit of hyperbole, but it's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Because when all the computers and shit, when it all goes down, when the EMP goes off and in the atmosphere and nothing works, like who's really going to be left? The people who know how to do it themselves, and
yeah, and you definitely want people to know that know how to do things, so they can chain you to a rock underground.
Well, right, yeah,
but I know.
But that's true.
But yeah, no, and the funny thing about technology is that now it's I never really realized that how the people are becoming, I don't want to say fetishistic about it, but it has its own life past its usefulness. Whereas it used to be like, oh yeah, you meet people that like, oh, I collect old transistor radios because it reminds me of 1964 and I got my first transistor radio. Well, now people are, obsessed with, 90s era computers. Like there's a YouTube guy, and I don't remember his name, but he's been doing this for 10 years. He goes and he buys old computers because he likes to play old games on them. So it's like he has like a 486, thing with 18 megabytes of RAM. I don't even remember I was actually trying to go back and do like a mental thing about every computer I've ever owned, because I haven't owned a ton of computers because I have a tendency to drive them till the wheels come off.
Oh yeah, I do the same thing. Yeah.
But it's like, it's starting to get up to be about 15 computers or whatever, but this guy will do that, for my from like one of my hobbies is I play music, and I like to buy a lot of outdated equipment. One, because it's cheap, and two, it's like kind of fun to try to, I'm not much of a songwriter, so it's like I'm mostly trying to like, oh, maybe I can try to emulate this sound. And it's getting to be like, harder and harder to like find how to integrate these, because things are so nice now. Like when I started playing the guitar, it's like, you buy your guitar and then you get your cord and you have an amp, and the amp, it was always the same story. It was a piece of crap and it sounded terrible, but you just dealt with it until you got something better. Well, now it's like for $100-$200, you can get something and you can plug it into your computer and it'll do everything. I mean, you can record with it direct from the CPU of the thing into your computer. You can download, like, I want to sound like Billy Corgan. I want to sound like Eddie Van Halen. I want to sound like Barracuda from Heart or whatever. And it's
Barracuda.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. But then I also find, even with the old stuff, getting like the book and it looks like an old like log book or something. Where it's like all I need to do is get out of. It's like everything is sub menus because it got to be like in the mid '80s. It went from like the '70s where every musical gear had knobs. Everybody loved knobs, and then in the '90s nothing had knobs. So it's like you got to hold this button, hit Shift, then hit the F key, and it brings up a sub menu that has your master tune. But it's getting to be on. It's like. Those are, you can definitely tell that the 90s or the late 80s, that these things were not meant for the long haul. They're not super functional. They're not a kind of thing where a chimp can show up and go, I know how to use this. Whereas a lot of things with knobs, you just keep turning the knobs and eventually you find out. And then with these things, it's like finding people that know about that stuff is kind of like nice because people have really spent time with the sub menus and like, oh yeah. Or they go to bother to make a program. So now you can plug it into your computer and it'll open it up and you can see a physical representation of every choice inside like a synthesizer that.
It's like a sitemap to your synth.
Yeah. But the funny thing is because, we're constantly bucking for, the moments of our day with games and our jobs and our lives and our relationships. It's like, how much time do I actually have to like look at the submenus of the brains of a Yamaha DX7 when I can just download the 15 patches this guy made that sound pretty close to what I probably would have come up with anyway. So it's like it's this thing where it's like, yeah, you can fetishize it, but then at a certain point you hit the wall and you realize, oh, this is why technology advanced. It's not user friendly.
Well, it almost outsources our obsession.
Yeah.
It's like, I've discovered this thing that I think is totally cool. So instead of me going through and learning all this stuff, I can go and find either whether it be on Wikipedia or whether it be in a news group somewhere, or whether it be on a YouTube channel. I can find out everything I need to know in 1/1000th of the time that it would have taken if I'd embarked on it myself. And we become instant experts. And again, it's kind of humorous because it's like, again, the technology in the Gibson novel, they call it the Microsoft, which is funny because it was right around the same time that the company was founded. But it's a port in the side of your head that you can put something into, and then you access it, software port, right? And you can neurally access the whatever program it is you put in the port. And there's a lot of conversation in the book about who's got the best ports and, like all that kind of stuff, and the high quality, low quality, all capacity and all that stuff. Then in the Matrix movie, we get it to where it's even more kind of advanced, where these people in the real world, you're plugged into the computer and we can just download whatever it is you need, whatever knowledge it is you need to exist in the Matrix. We're almost to that point. We just lack the physical plug.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's like, I picked up a book the other day and I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. I need to know more about, the South African border war, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I can click on, Wikipedia and I can get myself a real nice, overview of the whole thing. And not to say that I'm an expert, but now I know more about that than I ever would have known. And it took me, maybe an hour to read it, instead of me trying to go to like a library and hunt the book down and then find out, or go and say like, oh, I should take a college class on that, or saying, well, all these books have been written, which ones are the best, which ones are the most, academically rigorous in their research. It's all there now. It's all been distilled for you. And we're one step away from the plug,
Right. I always wonder though, it's like, what is the society that, doesn't have any kind of sense of discipline? What's that going to be like? Because, I'm not sitting here and saying that I'm a very disciplined person. It's like I can be, but usually it's such a surprise to me that I didn't even know I was capable of that. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I put in the time and I got something out of it, and it was hard, but it was worth it. And at the end of the day, I feel like sometimes you learn a little bit about your capabilities as a person. And when things are so, easy. And because I think about this a lot, because I, obsessively do this, where every evening when it's like start to wind down, I start going down my rabbit holes on the internet. Like, what do I want to read about? Do I want to read about Dwight Fry, the guy that was like in Frankenstein, or he played Igor in one of the classic Universal movies? Oh, well, that's interesting. Oh, Alice Cooper wrote a song about him. Let me go read about whatever happened. Who's still alive in the Alice Cooper band? And then, like, you go down these rabbit holes, and sometimes you do long, deep dives. Sometimes you do short ones.
It's like slow motion ADD.
Yeah, and then I wonder, though, it's like, what am I doing to my brain? Do I know this stuff? You know what I mean? It's like I can bore people here on the podcast. Thank you for listening. About my
click like and subscribe.
Yeah, click like and subscribe. Smash that bell button for notifications.
That's right.
But it's like, I don't know. Maybe that's the part of me that doesn't live in the present, where I was like, I don't know. Maybe I just have this facile understanding of everything. And it's like, it's only in there because there hasn't been something. It's only in my head because there isn't something more interesting that's going to push it out. And then if I ever need to recall it, because I don't know, it's like, I don't know how much this idea of having like the entire world in your pocket has really influenced, like, what am I processing and what am I keeping and stuff like that. Because I start to find like little things that I probably should just commit to memory, but I keep a tab open and I just go back and check it. It's like, oh, what's that site that has the thing? And I go click on it. And it's like, I don't know, maybe am I not doing my brain any favors by starting to do this thing? And I don't know how kids look at this stuff. And because I always think a lot about how they engage with technology, because I'm always thinking like, whatever they're doing, maybe I should be doing that. But then if you start chasing kids around, you're going to end up with like a bone through your nose and,
or in jail,
or a reverse mohawk with a what's his name? One of those Paul brothers tattooed on my back or something like that, or tattooed on my eyeball. Jake Paul tattooed on my eyeball. I can't tell the two Paul brothers apart. Yeah. It's just, but I think to myself, 30 years ago, did I really think I'd be even giving myself any cerebral storage space over to who these two idiots on the internet are? But I know who they are.
Right.
That's the kind of stuff that makes me think it's like, oh shit, I'm not really that disciplined as much as I should be, because it's like I'm marinating in this soup of knowing, an hour's worth of reading about a million things. But,
well, it's funny because for anyone who's interested in history and specifically the colonial history of Africa, there's a great book called The Washing of the Spears. And it was written in the 1950s, I want to say. And it's about this is a heavily loaded term, but about the pacification of South Africa by the British and the Dutch in the 1800s. And the establishment of the state of South Africa and the war between the Boers and the British, and then the British and the Zulu Nation, which ultimately resulted in the establishment of the country of South Africa. But anyway, it's an amazing book. It is thoroughly researched. It is heavily footnoted. It is 100% pure scholarship. The book was written by, I believe, he was an American naval officer who was stationed in England, or maybe he was an army officer stationed in England. But the point is, he did the entire research. He didn't go to Africa once. And this is in the 50s. And what he did is he sent letters to libraries and archives, and they copied things and sent things to him. And he, being in England, got to go to various museums that housed a lot of these artifacts and archives and writings and dispatches and newspapers and all these things. And he put together this book, which is unrivaled 60 years later in its scholarship and in its accuracy. And to do that in an age, when before TV or right around the birth of TV. The telephone was just really starting to get into full swing, you know, in an era where, you know, there is no internet, no satellite communication, none of that crap. And it's like the fact that you can put together this thing, this work of collating knowledge over a series of years, the dedication and the effort that it took to do that, and to do it to that high level. I don't know if people have it in them anymore to do that.
Yeah.
You know, that because one, there's a lot of it's already out there. So you don't need to put a book together about it, because you can just go read about it somewhere else, or you can go to one or two websites and do your own synthesis, you know. But the fact that someone was compelled to tell this story and to do it to such a high level of you know, accuracy and detail, and to do it through probably the most laborious and time consuming way, you know, through mail correspondence, right? Like, I'm writing a letter to the curator of the Museum of the, you know, Natal or whatever, so he can send me some mimeograph photos of this and some other stuff. You know, it's like, you have to write it, you have to mail it, and it takes a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, depends on how fast the boat is, you know, and then that person has to get it, acknowledge it, say they're going to do it, go do it, package it up, put it in the mail, and get it back to you. I mean, the fact that it only took this guy like 5 or 6 years to write this book is amazing when you think about it, you know. But nowadays, I can get all of that information. I can go visit those museums. I can see their collections, because it's all there. It's all scanned. It's all digitized. It's all, you know. It's like, so we don't. You talking about, you know, self-control and exercising it. Like, we are in an age where we're technologically destroying the attention span and the drive to actually do things. You know, this refrain, oh, it's just too hard. Well, is it really? Like, is anything really too hard anymore? Yeah. And the hardest thing is actually going to the gym and working out, you know?
Yeah.
Like, when you think about it, in our era, that's probably the hardest thing, because everything else is easy.
And going back after you went the first time.
That's
it's
right.
Like, and after you realize, like, it, you know, not just going like, well, I've gone.
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah, it's thing, and I'm definitely not wagging my finger at anybody. I've been a victim of this, where it's like, even as a middle-aged guy, it's like this cornucopia of entertainments, and I use this word too much because it always makes me giggle. Titillation of just everything, of just like, you know, am I frustrated in the sub menu of my stupid keyboard? Well, I've got another one, and I've got a virtual one. I'll play that. It's like, it's easy. I can go to my iPad and download a complete representation of something that would have cost me, you know, $2,000 20 years ago.
Right.
They do, and not only is it just it's not a facsimile like some things. It's the files. It's the digital files been digitized. And so if I'm having problems with the display on something, then I'll just play on the iPad. Or if I'm feeling frustrated because I'm ultimately not a very good musician, I can just go upstairs, kick my Xbox on, and play, like, you know, my favorite game right now, Dying Light, which is literally just hacking zombies with machete for an hour. And while I'm listening to an audio book, it's like this thing, and it feels like, I constantly feel like, what am I doing to my attention span? Like, I have to constantly, like, you know, it's like that thing where some people go like, I went somewhere and I forgot my phone, and it just drove me nuts. I had to go home and get my phone.
Fortunately, I'm not that bad.
Yeah,
I mean, if I realize, if I'm already on the road and I realize I forgot it, I just go.
But yeah, I've had to do like little, like, it's like micro discipline, like. I'm like, I'll be in a situation like shopping or maybe even socially, and I'm like, I'm a little bored. I'm getting bored here. I'm getting bored. Well, I can't, you know, maybe I should look at my phone. There's probably something going on my phone.
There's something exciting.
But somebody said something dumb today I can laugh at, and then I'm like, no, you can't. And they're like, why not? And it's like, I can't imagine what somebody that was steeped in this life and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe kids are out having experiences and whatever. But it's like this. It is also easy, and in a lot of ways, the facile knowledge can be indistinguishable from the real knowledge unless you run up against somebody who really knows their shit. Where somebody you just all of a sudden like want to wax, philosophical on, electronics, and all of a sudden you're next to an electrical engineer and he's like, I don't know what this guy's talking about.
You're
like,
stupid.
You've been reading Wikipedia again?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That thing's bullshit. That's like, I've seen more people like get electrocuted off of that article than anything else. Like, damn it. It's like, and also it's, but then again, I always think there's a certain amount of skill in disseminating all the information. Because I always think about like, when I want to tackle a topic for whatever reason, it's like Wikipedia, maybe Reddit will come up in search results, and then, like, I always know it's like Reddit is like the worst place to find deep, meaningful information.
I don't go there at all,
because it's it's somebody asks an honest and serious question,
and then all the a-holes chime in.
Everyone else makes a pun,
right?
And
or rips on you,
or they rip on you, or
you don't know that,
or they just. Or then they're like, oh, that reminds me of that time that my dad bought us hot dogs. And they're like, what does that have to do with this topic? And
and then somebody else chimes in, buy my book. Or whatever.
And it gets to be like this thing where
subscribe.
So I don't know how other people filter that out or filter out that impulse of like the constantly like, hey, there's something much more exciting around the bend. So when I'm frustrated and, especially things that don't matter, quote unquote, sorry, I forgot this is not a visual medium. I'm putting my quote fingers up. There's like hobbies and like just general knowledge, like knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's like, it's so easy just to jump ship on it. And it's like I just find it weird that we have so much access to so much information, but I don't see as much curiosity as I think that would engender. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. And I think that maybe that has something. I mean, the lack of curiosity stems from the ubiquity of the knowledge. The pursuit of knowledge used to be something that was, it was a rewarding pursuit. And you, like you say, when you finished something or you found something, there was a sense of accomplishment, Now it's you don't even have to click anything. You just voice search on Google. Google, tell me about, this, and it's like, okay, here it is, and blah blah. And you have all of this. The entire knowledge of the universe and human history is at your fingertips and at a voice command away. But nobody accesses it. Nobody uses it. At least not in the way that you would think. And I think that, like, you talk about packing things in your brain, and we used to have to memorize things because there was no internet and there was no phone in my pocket where I could just say, oh, who was the guy who was in that movie that one? Like, we had to know it.
If you put paper in your pocket, you might get your pocket wet and it
right.
would be useless anyway.
Exactly. And so we have become intellectually lazy in a lot of ways, and that's, I think, a byproduct of the technology, that because we don't have to think about thinking, and we don't have to really learn anything, because if I don't remember it, I can just pull my phone out, right?
Right.
And so you're talking about committing things to memory, and like, there's not a lot that has to be committed to memory anymore because we've outsourced memory now. We've outsourced.
Yeah, we're not putting it in our head like Johnny Mnemonic, the movie or whatever. I don't know what the book
Well, we're not even just putting it in our head like we used to. Like, I can still remember some of my friends' phone numbers when I was a kid because you had to memorize it. Right. I couldn't tell you what your phone number is. We text each other all the time. We're constantly in contact. I could not tell you. If you asked me right now, I couldn't tell you what your phone number is.
Yeah, I still don't know my mom's cell phone number.
Right.
It's like,
that's an excellent example. I don't know my mom's cell phone number. I call her all the time. I click on mom's cell on my phone and I call her. Her home phone number I have memorized because that was my home phone number as a kid.
It's a little song in your head that lives there forever. Yeah.
Yeah. And but again, it's so we don't, like anything, if we don't have to, we're not going to.
Right.
Like, I don't have to do that. It's right there. But again, to go back to what my architecture professor said, well, what happens when that thing goes away? And I guess that's a great, meditation on the potential of science fiction and whatever. Like, we look at these post-apocalyptic properties like Walking Dead or whatever, and it's like, who are the people that rise? Well, the people that can survive, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get all like, in end times or whatever, but there's something to be said for having proficiency and skill and knowledge to be able to do things without having to resort to crutches and tools, especially if they're virtual and can go away at any time. And it's like, think about if you do leave your phone at home, right? Like, how handicapped are you in doing life if you leave your phone somewhere? Think about that. And so anyway, it's kind of gotten in a weird spot, but
yeah,
but it is it's a conversation. It's two dudes, man. We're just talking about some shit, but it's an interesting, progression of thought, and we go from speculative future fiction from from people like William Gibson, where they talk about the problems that technology causes, and then here we are, pondering on the problems that technology is causing in our lives. And not that was necessarily one of the plots of his books, like everybody got dumb because their phones turned off. But it
inspires the thought.
Yeah, and that's again one of the reasons why I thoroughly recommend that you read all of his stuff.
But okay, now I would definitely,
except for Difference Engine. Unless you want to be a completist.
So, but let's give the listeners Neuromancer, of course, because it's kind of. Or would you still suggest it?
Oh, Neuromancer. So yeah, Neuromancer is a fast read. It's full of great characters. In my mind, and maybe it's just because I've been reading the book once a year since 1993. That it doesn't feel clunky to me. I'm sure that if you went in there with a super critical eye and you were like, oh, this is, dated crap because they don't talk about cell phones or whatever, it still feels relevant enough. But the storytelling in it is really great. It's his first full-length novel, and so as a must-read, it has a must-read status. You've got to read it. It's the foundational document that started all of those things. It's like going back and listening to George Norrie's show. Like, listen to his calls, listen to, the people calling into the show, listen to the show, and you'll understand where all this other shit like X-Files and Ancient Aliens and all the stuff we talk about now, that South Park makes fun of alien butt probes and like all of that's where it all came from. And it's the same thing. Go read Neuromancer and you'll understand where all of the video games that we play nowadays come from, the future sci-fi, dark, whatever fantasy games we play, the Matrix movies, comic books, modern sci-fi like you're talking about, the Elysium movie, things like that. A lot of these concepts of, the technology and computer science side of sci-fi. It gave us that great movie Hackers, of all things. Just kidding. Anyway, but it did, but
they call me
it's not really good.
Acid burn.
It's not really a good movie.
It's
but
not a good.
You just see where all these things came from. It's like when people say, "Oh, I'm a lit major," and you're like, "Well, what do you read?" "Oh, I read Harry Potter." And you're like, "Now, why don't you go back and read, like the Bronte sisters, and like do some other stuff, like learn where some of these things."
The present's going to take care of the present.
Yes.
Maybe dip your toe into the past
a little bit,
so you have something in the tank for the future.
Oh, that's deep, man.
Ooh,
that's deep.
Jeez, that is kind of deep.
Damn, I get a T-shirt that says that. But yeah, the other thing that I would highly recommend, the modern trilogy that starts with pattern recognition is really good for those who aren't really wanting to get into like hardcore sci-fi reading. That's, like I said, that's kind of set in current times, and it deals with relatively recent, world events and political stuff, and as a background for the storytelling. But then there's also, if you really kind of to understand the mind of the man, read the book Distrust That Particular Flavor, because it is a collection of all of his nonfiction writing, and like his take on Singapore. He calls it Disneyland with the death penalty. And like, I mean, it's just some fascinating stuff about like certain countries that ban his books, and all these things, and sort of his interesting take on science and technology and world events and all those things. And he just has a great way of writing it. Like I said, he's his, I get a little, over the top. Sometimes I describe him, I'd say he writes beautiful sentences, but it's true. He uses words in moderation. He's not a really wordy guy, but it's all high impact. And so his nonfiction writing is fantastic. Neuromancer is a must-do. If you like Neuromancer, definitely read that whole trilogy, because Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive are fantastic, as, again, carrying forward his themes. But, yeah, I mean, he's written 10 of his own novels. He's got a collection of short stories, Burning Chrome, and then a collection of nonfiction, Distrust That Flavor. And then there's the steampunk novel that he wrote with Bruce Sterling, The Difference Engine.
I ain't reading no steampunk.
Well, it's hilarious, because I guess the conceit of that novel is what would happen if Alan Babbage, the guy who created what is called the Difference Engine, which was the first computer, he sort of speculated, like, hey, if you take this machine and you can build it out, and it was the foundation of what became punch card technology.
Okay.
Yeah. He came up with that in the 1800s, but it wasn't feasible to build a machine big enough to do what he wanted. And so it was mostly kind of like Leonardo da Vinci. There was drawings, there was a lot of talk about it, but the helicopter didn't get made for another, 500 years or something like that. So the, like Da Vinci, the Alan Babbage thing with the Difference Engine, it was this computer that could never be made. So the novel that Sterling and Gibson wrote, it was basically like, well, what happens if he was actually able to make it? And so we have this steampunky kind of thing where it's like the Industrial Revolution is hit, but there's also this computational machine, and the whole story revolves around is it the Queen, or maybe like the Queen of England has a gambling problem.
I think I actually have heard that.
Yeah,
about that story. Yeah,
and so she has tasked her Babbage and his guys to create this machine, to write a program that basically will allow her to statistically analyze all of the betting so she can always win, right? And the story reminds me of what ultimately came, the characters in the story. So the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or whatever, what was it called? Dracula. The Dracula movie that had Keanu in it.
Bram Stoker's
Dracula. There you go. Sorry, not Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Yes. So the characters now, you got the blustery American who has the buffalo jacket and like all that, and these are totally the characters that are in the Difference Engine, right? So it's like you got the guy with the big Bowie knife, and he's from the United States, and he hunts down them buffaloes out on the and it's hilarious. And the characters and the what happens is the program gets written, and then it gets stolen. And so these guys have to go retrieve it and get it back to the Queen. Otherwise, the underworld will use this program to hedge all their bets and win. Anyway, it's a fun story, but it gets a little wordy. It gets a little long, and like I said, I blame Sterling on that, because if you read Gibson's work, you know that he's an economist when it comes to writing. He doesn't overly do anything. But it's an okay story. But it's one of those things. Like if you wind up becoming a super fan like me, you'll want to read it eventually, because you just want to have it all, read it all. But I would definitely not start there, because if you start there, you're going to get a totally different picture of what kind of a writer he is, and you might not go back. So anyway, the only thing is that if you are going to read his books, you have to understand that other than that, they're all trilogies.
Okay.
So there's 3 trilogies. So the first book in each trilogy, if you're going to start with a trilogy, you should probably start with the first book of the trilogy. So, it's either Neuromancer, Virtual Light, or Pattern Recognition are the first books in the trilogy. So anyway, and if you want, like I said, he's got a comic book out, a couple comics now, stuff like that. But yeah, again, it's just one of those things. I was so jazzed that he's got another one coming out here at the end of the year, which means that he'll probably be coming through our neck of the woods on a book signing tour. I've been to every single one of those since he started coming. Like, he goes to the University of Washington and signs books. He's been doing that for his last 3 books.
Well, does he live in Vancouver still?
Yeah, he still lives up in Vancouver, so he's a short drive away. So usually when he starts a book tour, his first stop is usually Seattle, and he goes down the West Coast, then goes across country, and then he'll come back, and he always finishes his book tour in Vancouver in his hometown, or his adoptive hometown or whatever. But yeah, like I said, it's just one of those things. Kind of, we're talking about people moving on and no longer being around to entertain us with their stuff, and I'm a huge fan of this guy, and I want him to live forever because I just want to keep reading his books. So
that's a nice thought, isn't it?
Yes, totally.
Well, I think we've hit our stated goals, which we didn't state any goals. I didn't have to bore everybody with my telling about the pop career of the bedroom pop subgenre of music that I've been listening to lately. Not necessarily enjoying, just fascinated with 20-something college students that kind of lazily write songs in their dorm rooms about flaming hot Cheetos and have huge careers now because of it. I think this was more interesting.
Possibly.
We'll save it. Maybe we'll save it for another one if I'm still listening to that crap.
Well, we can. Yeah, we have some goals for future episodes about what we're gonna focus on. Again, we're gonna kind of get back into our auteur mode and focus on some films and some other things.
Yeah,
but we might do a few more of these grab baggy things in the future if the people want it.
Yeah, and if you want to tell us that you like it, you can send us an email at hosts. It's host with an S at the end at talkingbirdcast.com. We also have a website. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com. We also have an Amazon affiliate link that I've never mentioned because I completely forgot about it because I thought they were doing away with it, but I don't think they are because I keep getting reminder emails. So if you want to support the show in some small way, you can... Before you go to Amazon, you can go to www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. And what it does, it's like a pass through. It takes you to Amazon. But when you do that with our link, it kicks back a percentage of what you purchased that takes it away from Amazon. It doesn't charge you extra, and it kicks it back to us. And it's just a simple, passive way to help offset the cost of hosting this show.
Yeah, go buy some Gibson books.
Yeah, go buy some. Yeah, I was gonna say if you want to buy a used copy of The Quickening, or you'd like to get woke and get that Star Trek Discovery DVD that's coming out, get me one so I don't have to pay for it.
If you send it to us, we'll review it.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do it. We'll give it its fair shake.
Maybe.
But yeah. I think that's good. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I wish I had something snappy to say at the end. What should I say that's snappy?
I don't know. I thought you said it earlier about saving something in the past.
Yeah.
We'll get a T-shirt made.
That thing within the future and the past and the... Oh, no. I won't tell my obsession with... No, I will. This is what I'll leave you with. Go into YouTube... and put in, if you like little weird moments in movies out of context, this is good for you. Sardine liqueur. Just put that into YouTube and watch the video that comes out. It's a hoot. All right. Thanks for listening. Peace.